The church doors burst open with a thunderous crash. "Stop this wedding!" The mountain man's voice echoed through Cedar Falls Baptist Church, like thunder rolling down from the peaks. 10 years of isolation had carved Elias Boone into something wild, something dangerous, and he'd just kissed another man's bride at the altar. The banker's face turned purple with rage. Clara Wynn's heart hammered against her corset. In 60 seconds, everything would change forever. Friends, stay with me through this incredible tale and drop a comment about where you're watching from. Let's see how far this story travels. The morning mist clung to the mountain peaks like a shroud when Elias Boone finally made his decision. 10 years. 10 long years since he'd set foot in any town, spoken to another soul, or looked into eyes that weren't those of a deer in his rifle sights. His calloused fingers traced the dwindling pile of salt in his storage barrel. Empty flour sacks lined the corner of his cabin. The last of his ammunition rattled lonely in its box. "Guess there's no avoiding it," he muttered to the wilderness, his voice rough from disuse like gravel scraping against stone. The trek down from his mountain refuge took 2 days. 2 days of wrestling with memories he'd buried deeper than any prospector's claim. With each descending step, the weight of his past pressed heavier on his broad shoulders. The Pinkerton incident, the blood on his hands justified, but blood nonetheless. The warrant that had driven him into these heights when he was barely 25. Now at 35, Elias Boone was more ghost than man. His dark hair hung past his shoulders, streaked prematurely with silver from winters that could freeze a man's soul. His beard, thick and untamed, concealed a face that had once been considered handsome in the valleys below. But it was his eyes that told the real story. Gray as winter storm clouds, holding depths of solitude that most men couldn't fathom. The town of Cedar Falls sprawled before him like a foreign country. New buildings had sprouted where he remembered empty lots. The smell of fresh lumber mixed with horse manure and coal smoke civilization's perfume. People bustled along wooden sidewalks, their chatter creating a symphony that made his ears ring after so much silence. He pulled his wide-brimmed hat low, hoping the years had changed him enough to avoid recognition. The general store stood where he remembered it, though the sign now read Morrison's Mercantile instead of Old Pete's Goods. The bell above the door jangled as he entered, and every head turned. The conversation stopped mid-sentence. A woman pulled her child closer. Men's hands drifted toward their hip holsters. Elias knew what he must look like, a savage descended from the peaks, more bare than man, carrying the smell of pine smoke and solitude. "Help you?" The shopkeeper's voice trembled slightly. He was young, maybe 20, with soft hands that had never known hard labor. "Supplies," Elias growled, producing a leather pouch heavy with gold nuggets, a decade's worth of patient panning from mountain streams. Salt, flour, ammunition, coffee beans. The shopkeeper's eyes widened at the gold. Real gold was rare these days, most folks dealing in paper money or credit. As the young man scurried to fill the order, Elias became aware of a commotion outside. Voices raised in excitement, the sound of many feet on wooden boards. "What's the fuss?" he asked, surprising himself with the question. When had he started caring about town business again? "Oh, that's the wedding?" the shopkeeper said, warming slightly to his unusual customer. "Or should say the auction. Miss Clara Wynn's getting married at noon, biggest event Cedar Falls has seen in years." Auction? The word tasted bitter in Elias's mouth. The shopkeeper leaned in conspiratorially, apparently deciding that anyone with that much gold deserved the full story. "See, Miss Clara's father died 6 months back, left debts nobody knew about. Mr. Harland, he's the banker, he called them in. Girl had no way to pay, so Harland worked out a deal. She marries him, the debts disappear. Been calling it a wedding, but everybody knows it's a sale. Man's 50 if he's a day, and she's barely 22. Something cold and sharp twisted in Elias's gut. He'd fled civilization to escape its cruelties, only to find they'd grown worse in his absence. She agreed to this. What choice did she have? It was marriage or see her mother's house seized, her young brother sent to the workhouse. Harlan made sure everyone knew the terms, made it all public-like, said it was to show his generosity. The shopkeeper spat the last word like it tasted of poison. Elias collected his supplies in silence, his mind churning. This wasn't his problem. He had no business involving himself in town affairs. He'd come for supplies, nothing more. But as he stepped back onto the street, his feet carried him toward the crowd gathering at the church, rather than toward the mountain trail. The Cedar Falls Baptist Church stood pristine white against the autumn sky, its steeple reaching toward heaven like an accusatory finger. The crowd pressed thick around the entrance farmers in their Sunday-best merchants in city-bought suits, women in bonnets and their finest dresses, all here to witness what they called a wedding, but what Elias recognized as something far uglier. He stood at the back of the crowd, his height allowing him to see over the heads of others. The church doors were open, revealing an interior awash with sunlight through stained glass. And there at the altar stood a scene that made his blood run first cold, then hot. The banker Josiah Harland looked like a toad dressed in expensive cloth. His stomach strained against a silk vest, his multiple chins spilling over a collar that must have cost more than most men made in a month. His thick fingers adorned with gold rings gripped the arm of his bride with possessive force. But it was the bride who stopped Elias's heart. Clara Wynne stood like a princess from a fairy tale turned nightmare. Her wedding dress was beautiful clearly, her mother's or grandmother's carefully preserved, but it hung on her frame like a shroud. Her honey-colored hair was pinned up in elaborate curls that must have taken hours, but couldn't hide the slight tremor in her shoulders. Her face pale as mountain snow remained composed, but her eyes. Lord, her eyes were green as spring grass and full of a desperation that Elias recognized. It was the look of a trapped animal that had given up hope of escape. Dearly beloved, the minister began, his voice carrying across the crowd. We are gathered here today to witness the union of Josiah Harland and Clara Wynne in holy matrimony. The words were traditional, but the minister's tone held no joy. He spoke like a man reading a funeral service, not performing a wedding. The crowd stood silent. No happy whispers, no tears of joy. This was a spectacle of power, not a celebration of love. Marriage is a sacred bond, the minister continued, ordained by God not to be entered into lightly or under duress. He paused on that last word, his eyes flicking to Clara, then to Harland. The banker's face darkened with warning. The minister cleared his throat and continued. Elias found himself pushing through the crowd, drawn forward by something he couldn't name. People parted before him, perhaps sensing the dangerous energy radiating from his frame. He reached the church entrance just as the minister asked, "If anyone here knows of any reason why these two should not be joined in holy matrimony, let them speak now or forever hold their peace." The silence stretched taut as a bowstring. Clara's eyes swept the crowd, and for just a moment they met Elias's. In that instant he saw everything. The fear, the resignation, but underneath it all, a spark of defiance that hadn't quite been extinguished. She was going through with this not because she accepted it, but because she saw no other choice. Elias had lived 10 years with the weight of his choices, 10 years of solitude as penance for violence, justified or not. But standing there watching this travesty unfold, he realized that sometimes inaction was the greater sin. His body moved before his mind could stop it. His boots thundered on the church floor as he strode down the aisle. "Stop this wedding!" Every head whipped around. Gasps rippled through the congregation like wind through wheat. The banker's face went from red to purple. "Who dares?" Harlan began, but Elias had already reached the altar. Up close, Clara was even more beautiful than he'd realized, but it was the flash of hope that suddenly lit her eyes that decided everything. "I haven't seen a woman in 10 years, Elias said, his voice carrying to every corner of the church. "Been living up in the mountains away from people, away from all this." He gestured to encompass the church, the crowd, the whole notion of civilization. "But even a hermit like me knows when something ain't right." "This is none of your concern, stranger," Harlan snarled. "This is a legal matter, debts owed and arrangements made. You have no standing here." Legal. Elias tasted the word. Legal like those Pinkerton boys who used to burn out homesteaders. Legal like the railroad taking folks' land for pennies on the dollar. Just because something's legal doesn't make it right. A murmur ran through the crowd. Several of the older men nodded slightly. They remembered the bad old days, the violence that had driven many good people to desperate measures. "You can't stop this," Harlan said, his voice dropping to a threat. I own the debt. I own the paper. Unless someone's prepared to pay it off right here, right now, this wedding continues. Elias reached into his coat and produced the leather pouch of gold. It hit the altar with a heavy thunk that echoed through the church. How much? Harlan's eyes glittered with greed, even as his face contorted with rage. $800. The crowd gasped. It was an astronomical sum, enough to buy a small ranch. Elias opened the pouch, revealing the nuggets within a decade's worth of solitary panning of patient work in hidden streams. Count it, he said simply. The banker's hands shook as he weighed the gold. The church held its breath. Finally, grudgingly, he nodded. It's sufficient. Then the debt's paid, Elias said. He turned to Clara, whose eyes were wide with shock. You're free, miss. You don't have to do this. But Harlan wasn't finished. The debt may be paid, but there's still the matter of the engagement. She gave her word, publicly. A contract was made. A contract under duress ain't worth the paper it's written on, Elias countered. Says who? You, and who are you exactly? Harlan's eyes narrowed. You look familiar, stranger. Something about you. Wait. His face lit with malicious triumph. I know you. You're Elias Boone, the mountain man wanted for murdering those Pinkerton agents 10 years back. Another gasp from the crowd, this one tinged with fear. Several men reached for their guns. Elias stood steady. Those Pinkertons were burning out the widow Patterson's farm with her and her children still inside. I did what needed doing, and I've paid for it with 10 years of exile. The law is the law, Harlan crowed. Sheriff, arrest this man. The sheriff, a grizzled man in his 50s, stepped forward reluctantly. He'd known the widow Patterson remembered the incident. Now, Mr. Harlan, that was a long time ago. The law has no expiration date on murder, Harlan insisted. Arrest him or I'll have your badge. The tension in the church could have been cut with a knife. Elias saw his future branching before him, arrest trial, probably hanging. All for trying to stop an injustice. The bitter irony of it wasn't lost on him. Then Clara spoke for the first time, her voice clear as a mountain stream. If Mr. Boone is arrested, then I demand the same consideration for Mr. Harlan. What? The banker spluttered. My father's death was ruled suspicious by Dr. Morrison. Clara continued, her voice gaining strength. He was a healthy man who suddenly took ill after refusing to sell Mr. Harlan our land, the land that adjoins the new railway route. The doctor wanted an investigation, but Mr. Harlan convinced the town council it wasn't necessary. Baseless accusations, Harlan roared. Then let's investigate both matters, Clara said. Mr. Boone's decade-old case of defending a widow and her children, and your very recent case of possible murder for profit. The crowd was buzzing now. Dr. Morrison, standing near the back, called out, I stand by my concerns, Thomas. Wynne was healthy as a horse before that sudden illness. Harlan looked around wildly, seeing the crowd's mood shifting. This is conspiracy slander. Then you have nothing to fear from an investigation, the sheriff said slowly. Seems to me both matters deserve a proper looking into. In the chaos of arguments that erupted, Elias made a decision that surprised even himself. He stepped close to Clara and said quietly, Miss, I can get you out of here right now, but we need to move fast. She looked up at him, this wild man who'd appeared from nowhere to save her. Why would you help me? Because someone should have helped the widow Patterson before it came to violence. Because sometimes a man gets a chance to do something right, and if he doesn't take it, he has to live with it forever. She studied his weathered face, his storm cloud eyes, and made her own decision. Yes. But Harlan overheard. She goes nowhere. She's still my fiancée. Actually, Elias said, a wild idea taking hold. She's not. Before anyone could react, before he could think better of it, Elias pulled Clara into his arms and kissed her. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was a claiming, a statement, a declaration of war against everything Harlan represented. Clara stiffened in shock, then understanding his game melted into it, selling the performance. When they broke apart, the church was silent as a tomb. According to the old mountain law, Elias set his voice carrying to every corner, A woman kissed at the altar by another man can't marry the first. She's been claimed. That's not a real law, Harlan shrieked. It is where I come from, Elias said steadily, and since I've been living by mountain law for 10 years seems fitting I should invoke it now. The minister, who'd been watching everything with growing concern, suddenly spoke. There is precedent in the old territorial laws. A public claim supersedes a private contract if the woman doesn't object. Every eye turned to Clara. She stood straight, her chin raised, that spark in her eyes now, a full flame. I don't object. This is outrageous. Harlan lunged forward, but several men in the crowd stepped forward to block him. The tide had turned. Miss Wynne, Elias said formally, loud enough for all to hear, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife right here, right now? The crowd gasped again. This was beyond anything they'd expected from their afternoon's entertainment. Clara looked at this strange, wild man who'd appeared like something out of a fairy tale to save her from a monster. She knew nothing about him except that he'd killed to save innocence and paid for it with a decade of solitude. She knew he had gold enough to pay her father's debts and courage enough to face down the most powerful man in town. And she knew that whatever life he offered, it had to be better than what Harlan had planned. Yes, she said clearly. Yes, I'll marry you. Minister, Elias said, turning to the frozen preacher, I believe you have a wedding to perform. This is illegal, Harlan screamed. I'll have you all arrested. Mr. Harlan, the sheriff said firmly, you've been paid your debt. The lady has made her choice. Unless you want me to open that investigation into Thomas Wynne's death right now, I suggest you leave this church. The banker looked around wildly, seeing no support in the faces around him. Even his own hired men had stepped back, unwilling to challenge the mountain man who radiated danger like heat from a forge. This isn't over, he hissed. You think you've won? I own this town. I own the law. You'll be hanging from a rope before the week is out. Boone? Maybe, Elias said calmly, but that's tomorrow's problem. Today, I'm getting married. Harlan stormed out his departure, followed by a collective exhale from the crowd. Then incredibly, someone started clapping. Then another. Soon the entire church was applauding, the sound rising to the rafters. The minister, looking somewhat dazed, said, Well then, I suppose we should begin. And so, in the most unlikely of circumstances, Elias Boone and Clara Wynne stood before the altar. The late afternoon sun slanted through the stained glass, painting them in jeweled light. The crowd pressed closer, eager to witness this unexpected turn of events. Do you, Elias Boone, take Clara Wynne to be your lawfully wedded wife? The minister asked, his voice still uncertain. Elias looked down at the woman beside him. This stranger, who'd shown more courage in the last few minutes than most showed in a lifetime. I do. And do you, Clara Wynne, take Elias Boone to be your lawfully wedded husband? Clara didn't hesitate. I do. Then by the power vested in me by God and the territory of Colorado, I pronounce you man and wife. You may, well, you already kissed the bride, so... A ripple of nervous laughter ran through the crowd. Elias took Clara's hand. It was small and is trembling slightly, but her grip was firm. We need to leave, now. She nodded. My things can be sent for later. Harlan won't take this quietly. We need to get to the mountains before he rallies his men. They moved through the crowd, which parted respectfully. Some reached out to touch Clara's dress for luck. Others nodded approvingly at Elias. At the door, old Mrs. Morrison pressed a bundle into Clara's hands. Food for your journey, dear, she whispered, and thank you for speaking up about my Thomas. I always knew that banker had something to do with his death. Outside Elias's horse, a sturdy mountain mustang waited where he'd left it. His supplies were already loaded. He swung up into the saddle and reached down for Clara. She took his hand without hesitation, allowing him to pull her up behind him. Her wedding dress made riding awkward, but she hitched it up without complaint, wrapping her arms around his waist. Hold tight, he warned. We'll be riding hard. I'm not afraid, she said into his back, and he believed her. They thundered out of Cedar Falls as the sun began its descent toward the mountains. Behind them, they could hear shouting, Harlan's voice rising above the others, demanding a posse, demanding justice, demanding blood. But the townspeople were slow to respond. Many had debts to Harland, but none had love for him. The delay would give them the head start they needed. As they climbed into the foothills, Clara finally spoke. "What have we done?" "Got married, apparently," Elias replied, a note of dark humor in his voice. "You don't even know me." "You don't know me either, but I know you were brave enough to stand up to that bastard, even when you thought you had no choice. That tells me enough." "And what do I know about you?" she asked. "That you're a wanted man who's been living alone in the mountains for a decade. That about sums it up." They rode in silence for a moment, then Clara said, "That's not quite all. I know you spent your gold to save a stranger. I know you risked arrest and hanging to stop an injustice. And I know you gave me a choice when everyone else was taking them away." Elias felt something in his chest that he hadn't felt in 10 years, a warmth that had nothing to do with exertion or the woman pressed against his back. Well, not entirely nothing to do with her. "What's it like?" Clara asked as they climbed higher, the town disappearing behind them. "Living in the mountains while quiet," he said. "Cold in winter, beautiful in summer. Hard work every day just to survive. Lonely." He paused. "Maybe less lonely now." "Maybe," she agreed softly. They rode through the deepening twilight, the mountain path familiar to Elias, even in near darkness. His cabin was still 2 days away, but he knew a dozen places they could shelter for the night. Behind them, no sound of pursuit. Perhaps the sheriff had delayed longer than expected. Perhaps Harlan's men had refused to chase a dangerous man into his own territory. Or perhaps the town had finally decided that some injustices weren't worth preserving. As they made camp that first night in a sheltered grove of aspens by a clear mountain stream, Elias watched Clara struggle with the reality of what she'd done. She sat by the fire he'd built still in her wedding dress, now torn and dirty from the ride, staring into the flames. "You can go back," he said quietly. "I'll take you back if you want. The marriage isn't... We haven't... You could get it annulled." She looked up at him, this strange, rough man who'd saved her. "Go back to what my father is dead, possibly murdered. The man who wanted to own me now wants me dead too, probably. My mother's house will be seized anyway. Harland will make sure of it. My brother..." She paused, pain crossing her features. "My brother is better off without me there to complicate things. The Thompsons will take him in. They're good people. Still, this isn't the life you planned." Clara laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I planned to marry for love. I planned to have children who'd grow up free and happy. I planned a lot of things before my father died, and I learned about debts I never knew existed." She looked at him directly. "What about you? What did you plan?" Elias was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "I planned to be a lawman, actually. Had a badge and everything down in Kansas. Then the railroad brought in Pinkerton men to clear out settlers who wouldn't sell. Legal, like they said. All proper papers. But burning out families ain't legal in any book that matters. When I tried to stop them, they said I was interfering with legal process. When I kept trying, they threatened to have me arrested. And when they went after the widow Patterson anyway, you killed them. 3 of them. The others ran. Mrs. Patterson and her children lived. But the railroad had deeper pockets and better lawyers. They put a price on my head that had every bounty hunter in 3 states looking for me, so I ran. Came up here where no one would find me. Been here ever since. Alone. Alone." He poked at the fire with a stick. "It was better that way. Safer for everyone. And now I've got a wife, apparently." This time her laugh held real warmth. "The strangest wedding in Colorado Territory history, I'd wager." "Probably." They sat in comfortable silence, the fire crackling between them, the mountains rising dark and protective around them. Finally, Clara said, "I should thank you." "No need." "Yes, there is. You didn't have to do what you did. You could have bought your supplies and gone back to your mountain. You chose to help. That matters." Elias looked at her across the fire, this woman who'd been a stranger this morning and was now his wife. Her hair had come partly undone, falling in honey-colored waves around her shoulders. Her green eyes caught the firelight like emeralds. She was beautiful, but it was her courage that drew him. The way she'd stood up in that church accused Harlan taking a wild chance on a wild man. "We should sleep," he said roughly. "Long ride tomorrow." He gave her his bedroll and took the ground himself, staying on the other side of the fire. But sleep eluded him. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her face in that church, the desperation, then the hope, then the determination. He'd acted on instinct, but now the reality settled on him like snow. He had a wife. He, Elias Boone, who'd spoken to no one for a decade, who'd forgotten the sound of his own voice, had a wife. On her side of the fire, Clara lay equally awake. The mountain night was alive with sounds she didn't recognize, the call of owls, the rustle of unknown creatures, the whisper of wind through pine. But she wasn't afraid. The man across from her, her husband, she reminded herself with a start, was dangerous, yes, but not to her. She knew it instinctively, the way she'd known her father had been murdered, the way she'd known Harlan would destroy her soul if she'd married him. "Elias," she whispered. "Yeah." "What happens when we get to your cabin?" "We figure it out as we go." "That's not much of a plan. Plans haven't worked out too well for either of us so far." She couldn't argue with that. The next morning they rose with the dawn. Clara watched fascinated as Elias moved through his morning routine, checking for tracks around their camp, dousing the fire, preparing the horse. Every movement was economical practice, the result of years of solitary survival. He caught trout from the stream for breakfast, cooking them over the coals with a skill that spoke of countless similar meals. "You'll need different clothes," he said, eyeing her tattered wedding dress. "That won't last another day of riding." "It's all I have." He dug through his pack and produced a shirt and trousers. "They'll be too big, but better than what you've got." She took them gratefully, then looked at him expectantly. He turned his back while she changed a gesture of courtesy that touched her. The clothes were indeed huge on her frame, but she rolled up the sleeves and cuffs using a length of rope as a belt. When he turned back, something flickered in his eyes, amusement perhaps, or something warmer. "You look like a child playing dress-up," he said. "I look like a mountain man's wife," she countered, and was rewarded with what might have been a smile beneath his beard. They rode through the second day, climbing higher into the mountains. The path grew narrower, more treacherous. Sometimes Clara had to close her eyes as the horse picked its way along ledges that dropped into dizzying space. But Elias never faltered, guiding them with the sure knowledge of a man who knew every rock and tree. Late in the afternoon, they heard horses behind them, still distant but closing. "Harlan's men?" Clara asked, though she knew the answer. "Most likely. We're still an hour from my cabin, but they won't follow us there." "Why not?" "Because they know I'll have the advantage. These mountains are my territory. They come for me here, they won't leave." The certainty in his voice should have frightened her. Instead, it reassured her. This man, her unexpected husband, would protect her. She didn't doubt it for a moment. They pushed harder, the horse laboring under the double weight and the steep climb. Behind them, the sound of pursuit grew closer. Clara could make out voices now, rough men calling to each other. Harlan's voice rising above them all, promising rewards for Boone's head and punishment for failure. Then, just as the sun was setting, they crested a final ridge, and Clara saw it, Elias's cabin. It wasn't what she'd expected. Built of solid logs, chinked with mud and moss, it nestled against a cliff face that protected it from behind. A clear stream ran nearby, and a small garden plot showed evidence of recent tending. Smoke rose from the chimney, which confused her until Elias explained, "Banked the fire before I left. Easier than starting fresh when I got back." The cabin was modest but well built, with real glass windows, a luxury in the mountains, and a solid door reinforced with iron bands. A lean-to shelter housed a small forge and workshop. Everything about it spoke of a man who'd built for the long term, who'd made peace with his isolation. "It's perfect," Clara breathed and meant it. Elias looked at her sharply, searching for sarcasm, but found none. "It's rough. No feminine comforts." "It's freedom," she countered. "It's safety. It's yours, ours." That word ours hung between them like a question. They dismounted, and Elias immediately began preparing. He brought the horse into the lean-to, ensuring it had water and feed. He checked his rifle, loaded his pistols, positioned ammunition where he could reach it quickly. Clara watched, understanding that this was a dance he'd rehearsed in his mind many times, the last stand of a hunted man. "What can I do?" she asked. He looked at her, this woman in his clothes, standing in his doorway, ready to fight beside him. "Can you shoot?" "My father taught me. I'm no marksman, but I can hit what I aim at." He handed her a rifle. "Windows are built for firing positions. If they come, shoot anyone who gets close. Don't hesitate. These men won't." She took the weapon, checked it with competent hands. They might try to negotiate. Harlan doesn't negotiate. He takes. Like he tried to take me. Yes. They waited as darkness fell. The sounds of pursuit had stopped, but Elias knew the men were out there making camp, planning their assault. They'd wait for dawn, most likely. Attacking a fortified position in darkness was suicide, especially when the defender knew the terrain. Inside the cabin, by the light of a single candle, Clara explored her new home. It was sparse but clean. A single bed with a straw mattress and warm furs. A table and 2 chairs. Why 2, she wondered, for a man who never had visitors. Shelves lined with preserved foods, books, surprisingly many books, and the tools of survival. A loom in the corner with half-finished cloth still stretched across it. "You weave?" she asked, surprised. "Man needs clothes, easier to make than to buy." She ran her fingers across the fabric, rough but sturdy, like the man who'd made it. "You're full of surprises, Elias Boone." "Disappointment's more likely." She turned to face him. "I'm not disappointed." They stood there in the candlelight, husband and wife who barely knew each other, bound by desperation and defiance rather than love. But something else was growing between them, fragile as spring ice, dangerous as hope. A shout from outside shattered the moment. "Boone, we know you're in there," Harlan's voice carried on the mountain wind. "Send out the girl and we'll leave peaceful, like." Elias snorted. "Peaceful, right." "You believe that?" Clara asked. "Not for a second. You're a witness now, to his threats, his crimes. He can't let you live any more than he can me." "Boone," Harlan called again, "you've got 1 minute to decide, send her out or we burn you out." "Like the Pinkertons tried with the widow Patterson," Elias muttered. He moved to the window, called back, "You try to burn this cabin, Harlan, and you'll find out why I've survived 10 years up here. These walls are stone-backed and mud-chinked. Your fire won't touch them." "We'll see about that." But nothing happened. The night stretched on, tense and waiting. Clara dozed fitfully in the chair while Elias kept watch. Near dawn, he touched her shoulder gently. "They're moving." She came awake instantly, gripping the rifle. Through the windows, they could see shadows shifting in the pre-dawn gray. 6 men, maybe 7, spreading out to surround the cabin. "Remember," Elias said quietly, "don't hesitate." The attack came with the sunrise. The first shots shattered the morning stillness, splintering wood from the door and window frames. Elias returned fire, methodically forcing the attackers to take cover. Clara watched, waiting for a clear target, her heart pounding, but her hands steady. Then she saw him, a man creeping along the tree line, trying to flank them. She led him, slightly squeezed the trigger. The man cried out and fell. "Good shot," Elias said, without looking. The firefight continued for an hour, neither side gaining advantage. Then Harlan's voice rose again. "You can't win, Boone. We've got more men coming. The whole town's turned against you. You're harboring a kidnapped woman." "Kidnapped?" Clara shouted back, her anger overcoming caution. "I married him of my own free will. The whole church witnessed it." "You were coerced, confused. He's a killer." "And what are you?" "Harlan, my father knew something about your railroad deal, didn't he? That's why he had to die." The silence that followed was telling. Then unexpectedly, another voice joined the conversation. "Mr. Harlan, Mr. Boone." It was Sheriff Watson, and he wasn't alone. Clara could see a dozen men emerging from the trees, townsmen, not Harlan's hired guns. "Sheriff," Harlan said smoothly, "thank God you're here. This man has kidnapped—" "Nobody's kidnapped anybody," the sheriff interrupted. "I've got 30 witnesses say that wedding was voluntary. What I do have is Dr. Morrison's report on Thomas Wynn's death and some very interesting documents from your own office that suggest you had good reason to want him dead. You searched my office without a warrant. Didn't need to search it. Your clerk, young Timothy, brought them to me. Seems his conscience has been bothering him something fierce. Even from inside the cabin, Clara could see Harlan's face go pale. Now, the sheriff continued, I'm placing you under arrest, Mr. Harlan, for suspicion of murder. And as for you, Mr. Boone, that decade-old warrant, well, I've been in touch with Kansas. Seems the widow Patterson and her children have been petitioning for years to have it dropped. The new judge down there is sympathetic, says if you'll come in peaceful-like, tell your side he's inclined to call it justifiable defense of innocence. Elias stood slowly, hardly daring to believe. You're serious? I am, though I'd understand if you wanted to think on it a spell. You've been up here 10 years, a few more days won't matter. Harlan wasn't finished. This is corruption. I'll have all your badges. His words were cut off as one of his own hired men clubbed him from behind. Sorry, Sheriff, the man said, but he owes us 3 months' pay and we just found out he's been lying about having the money. Figured you'd want him conscious for the trial, but not necessarily comfortable. The sheriff sighed. I didn't see that. See what? The man asked innocently. And just like that, it was over. The siege ended not with blood, but with justice delayed but not denied. The townsmen hauled Harlan away his threats and protests echoing off the mountains until distance swallowed them. Elias and Clara stood in their doorway, watching the procession disappear down the mountain path. The sheriff lingered, tipping his hat. You folks need anything, you let me know. And ma'am, your brother's safe with the Thompsons, but he'd surely like to see you when you're ready to come down. Thank you. Clara whispered, tears she hadn't expected running down her cheeks. When they were alone again standing in the doorway of the cabin that improbably had become their home, Elias said, You can go back now. Safe. Free. The marriage, we can annul it. You can have your life back. Clara looked at him. This man who'd saved her, fought for her, offered her freedom at every turn. Then she looked at the cabin, the mountains, the vast sky, spreading above them painted gold and pink with sunrise. What if I don't want my old life back, she asked. What if I want this one? This is no life for a woman like you. Isolation, hard work, winter storms that can trap you for months. Elias. She stopped him with a hand on his arm. You keep offering me choices. Here's mine. I choose to stay. I choose this. She paused, then added quietly, I choose you. He stared at her, this woman who'd been a stranger yesterday, who'd become his wife by necessity, who now stood offering something neither of them had expected, the possibility of a real marriage, a real life born from the ashes of their separate desperations. It won't be easy, he warned. Nothing worthwhile ever is. I don't know how to be a husband. I don't know how to be a mountain wife. We'll learn together. He studied her face, seeing determination mixed with something else, hope perhaps, or the beginning of something that might, given time and trust, grow into love. Together, he repeated, testing the word. It had been so long since he'd thought in terms of together rather than alone. Clara smiled, the first real smile he'd seen from her. It transformed her face, chasing away the shadows of yesterday's fear. Show me our home properly, Elias Boone. Show me this life you've built. Let's see what we can make of it together. And so as the sun climbed higher into the Colorado sky, Elias led his unexpected bride into their cabin. He showed her the root cellar he'd dug, stocked with preserved vegetables and smoked meats. He explained the watershed, how he'd diverted part of the stream to ensure constant fresh water. He demonstrated the shutters that could withstand winter storms and the hidden compartments where he stored ammunition and gold. Clara listened, asked questions, made suggestions. She exclaimed over his small library, admitted she'd loved reading since childhood. She examined his loom with interest, proposing improvements based on techniques her grandmother had taught her. She stood in the doorway, breathing the clear mountain air, and said, it was the first time she'd felt truly free since her father's death. As the day progressed, they began the delicate dance of two solitary souls learning to share space. Clara insisted on cooking dinner, producing a meal from his simple supplies that surpassed anything he'd made in years. Elias repaired the damage from the morning's gunfight, teaching her how to patch bullet holes and strengthen weak points. That night, as they sat by the fire inside this time safe and warm, Clara asked, Tell me about the 10 years. What was it like truly? And Elias, who'd spoken to no one about his decade of exile, found himself talking. He told her about the first terrible winter when he'd nearly died, too proud to go down for supplies, too stubborn to give up. About learning to read the mountain's moods, to predict storms by the behavior of birds, to find food in every season. About the books that had saved his sanity read and reread until he could recite passages from memory. About the profound silence that could drive a man mad or teach him peace depending on how he faced it. And you, he asked, what was your life before? All well this poor, Clara told him about growing up in Cedar Falls when it was just a mining camp, about her father's dreams of prosperity that always seemed just out of reach, about her mother's death when she was 15 and how she'd raised her younger brother while her father grew distant and secretive, about the slow realization that something was wrong, that her father was involved in something that frightened him, and then his sudden death and the revelation of debts that made no sense. I think he was trying to protect us, she said quietly. I think he discovered something about Harlan's plans and tried to stop it or profit from it. I'll never know which. But it killed him. And now Harlan will face justice. Maybe. Men like him have ways of avoiding consequences. Not this time, Elias said with quiet certainty. The whole town turned against him. That doesn't happen unless the evidence is overwhelming. They talked until the fire burned low, sharing stories slowly filling in the gaps of who they were beyond the desperate circumstances that had brought them together. When Clara finally yawned, Elias stood. You take the bed, Elias. She stopped him. We're married. Whatever the circumstances, we're married. I won't have you sleeping on the floor in your own home. Clara, just because we're married doesn't mean... I don't expect... I know. She touched his hand gently. I'm not offering more than I'm ready to give, but surely we can share a bed for warmth and comfort without expectations. He looked at her, this remarkable woman who continued to surprise him. You trust me that much? You gave me freedom when everyone else was trying to take it. Yes, I trust you. And so for the first time in a decade, Elias Boone shared his bed with another human being. They lay carefully apart, at first aware of each other's breathing, each other's warmth. But in the night, as the mountain cold crept in, they drew together naturally, seeking heat, and finding something more, a sense of belonging neither had expected. Clara woke at dawn to find herself curled against Elias's chest, his arm around her protectively. She should have felt embarrassed or afraid. Instead, she felt safe. She felt home. The weeks that followed their impromptu wedding passed in a rhythm neither had anticipated. Each morning, Elias would wake before dawn, his body trained by a decade of solitude, only to find Clara already stirring beside him, adapting to mountain time with surprising ease. They moved around each other carefully, at first two people learning to share space after years of having their movements dictated by others or by no one at all. You don't have to get up with me, Elias said one morning, watching Clara tie her hair back with a strip of leather she'd found. The mountains don't care if I'm tired, she replied, pulling on the boots he'd managed to trade for in a brief trip to the nearest trading post. Besides, someone needs to make sure you eat more than jerky and hardtack. He wanted to protest that he'd survived just fine on jerky and hardtack for 10 years, but the truth was, her cooking had reminded him of pleasures he'd forgotten. She could turn his simple stores into meals that actually tasted like something, and she'd already started expanding the garden plot planning for crops he'd never bothered with. 3 weeks into their marriage, a rider appeared on the mountain trail. Elias saw him first, his hand instinctively going to his rifle, but Clara recognized the horse before the rider. It's Timothy, she said, squinting against the morning sun. Harlan's former clerk. The young man approached cautiously, clearly nervous about entering the mountain man's domain. When he was close enough to speak without shouting, he removed his hat. Mrs. Boone, he said, and Clara felt a strange flutter at the name. Mr. Boone, I bring news from town. Speak it then, Elias said, not lowering his rifle entirely. Timothy's Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed. Mr. Harlan is dead, sir. Clara gasped. Elias's expression didn't change, but his grip on the rifle shifted slightly. How? Clara asked. Hanged himself in his cell night before last. Left a letter confessing to, well, to everything. Your father's murder, Mrs. Boone, the land schemes, the forced marriages he'd arranged before yours, everything. Convenient, Elias muttered. Timothy nodded nervously. That's what some folks are saying. Sheriff Watson says suicide, but he shrugged. Harland had enemies. Lots of them. Could be someone decided justice needed helping along. And why are you here telling us this? Elias asked. The young man straightened. Because there's more. Harland's confession included details about hidden account stolen funds. The territorial judge has ruled that his assets should be distributed among his victims. Mrs. Boone, your father's legitimate debts have been cleared and there's compensation besides. Your family home is yours again, free and clear. Your brother can come home. Clara sank onto the porch step they'd built together the week before. Home, she whispered. Timothy produced a leather portfolio from his saddlebag. The papers are all here. Just need your signature. There's also... He hesitated. There's about $3,000 in compensation. The judge felt it was appropriate given what Harlan put you through. $3,000. It was a fortune. Enough to live comfortably in town for years. Enough to start over anywhere she wanted. Elias watched Clara's face carefully, seeing the war of emotions there. He set down his rifle and spoke quietly. Timothy, water your horse at the stream. We need a moment. The clerk nodded and led his mount away, giving them privacy. You should go, Elias said simply. Clara looked up at him sharply. What? Your home is waiting. Your brother needs you. You have money now, freedom. Real freedom, not just the absence of immediate danger. And what about our marriage? We both know it was born of necessity. No one would blame you for walking away now that the necessity has passed. Clara stood slowly, and for a moment Elias thought she would hit him. Instead, she grabbed his shirt and pulled him down to her level. Elias Boone, you listen to me. I have spent 3 weeks learning your moods, your habits, the way you take your coffee, and the sound you make when you're content. I've watched you work from dawn to dusk, making this place better, not for yourself, but for me. I've felt you hold me at night when the nightmares come, and yes, I know you have them too. Don't you dare tell me what I should do unless you're prepared to tell me what you want me to do. He stared at her, this fierce woman who'd transformed his exile into something else entirely. I want you to stay, he admitted roughly. God help me, I want you to stay, but not because you have nowhere else to go, not because you're trapped. Then ask me to stay because you want me here, because these 3 weeks have been the beginning of something neither of us expected, but both of us needed. Clara. Ask me, Elias. He cupped her face in his calloused hands, saw his own hope reflected in her green eyes. Stay with me, Clara. Not because you have to, but because you want to. Because this place has become ours, not just mine. Because He stopped the words too new, too frightening. Because you what? She prompted softly. Because I'm falling in love with you, he said in a rush, as if the words might burn him if he spoke them slowly. Because every morning when I wake up and you're there, I remember what it means to be human. Because you've made these mountains into a home instead of a hiding place. Clara's eyes filled with tears. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I'll stay. They signed the papers Timothy had brought claiming the compensation, but making it clear that Clara would remain in the mountains. Timothy seemed confused but didn't argue. Before he left, he had one more piece of news. Sheriff Watson asked me to tell you, Mr. Boone, that the Kansas matter has been officially resolved. The warrant has been withdrawn. You're a free man. Free. The word sat strangely in Elias's mind. He'd been physically free in the mountains, but legally hunted. Now he was legally free, but chose to remain in the mountains. The irony wasn't lost on him. There's one more thing, Timothy added, producing a smaller envelope. This came for you, Mrs. Boone, from your brother. Clara tore it open with shaking hands, reading quickly. Then she laughed, a sound of pure joy that echoed off the mountain peaks. He's doing well, she told Elias. The Thompsons have formally taken him in, and he started school properly. He says, she paused reading, he says he's proud of me for choosing my own path. He wants to visit come spring if we'll have him. Of course we'll have him, Elias said immediately, then caught himself. That is if you— We'll have him, Clara confirmed, taking his hand. After Timothy left, they stood together watching his figure disappear down the mountain trail. The autumn air was crisp, carrying the scent of coming snow. Soon the passes would be difficult, then impossible. They would be truly alone together through the winter months. Are you ready for it? Elias asked. Winter here is nothing like winter in town. We could be snowed in for weeks at a time. Then I suppose we'd better prepare, Clara said practically. Show me what needs doing. They spent the next weeks in furious preparation. Elias taught Clara to hunt, surprised by how quickly she took to it. Her father had taught her to shoot, but Elias taught her to track to read sign to understand the patterns of deer and elk. She proved to have a natural instinct for it, moving quietly through the forest as if she'd been born to it. Clara in turn transformed their food stores. She knew techniques for preservation that Elias had never learned, ways to keep vegetables through the winter that went beyond simple root cellaring. She organized their supplies with an efficiency that amazed him, creating an inventory system that would ensure they used nothing past its prime. Together they expanded the cabin. Using some of the compensation money, they'd ordered supplies from the trading post, real glass for additional windows, proper roofing materials, a cast iron stove that would heat more efficiently than the open fireplace. They worked side by side, Elias teaching Clara construction techniques while she suggested improvements he'd never considered. One evening, as they worked to install the new stove before the first snow, Clara asked, "Did you ever think about taking a wife during those 10 years?" Elias paused in his work. "I thought about a lot of things, but thinking and doing are different. I'd convinced myself I didn't deserve companionship. That isolation was penance. For saving a family. For killing. Justified or not taking a life changes you. I thought I needed to pay for that." Clara set down her tools and moved to him. "Maybe you did need time to come to terms with it, but Elias, you're not a killer. You're a protector. There's a difference." "Is there?" "Yes. A killer acts from anger or greed or pleasure. You acted from love, love for people you didn't even know, love for justice, love for what's right. That's not something to pay penance for. That's something to honor." He pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. She smelled of wood smoke and pine, of the lavender soap she'd made from plants she'd found growing wild. She smelled like home. The first snow came early that year, catching them still working on the final preparations. Clara stood in the doorway, watching the fat flakes fall, transforming the harsh mountain landscape into something softer. "It's beautiful," she breathed. "Wait until there's 6 feet of it and you can't see past your nose," Elias warned, but he was smiling. "Still beautiful," she insisted. That night, as the snow continued to fall, they made love for the first time. It wasn't the desperate passion of novels Clara had read, nor the rough claiming Elias had imagined in his lonelier moments. It was tentative and tender. Two people learning each other in a new way, finding rhythms and preferences, discovering that physical intimacy could be another form of conversation. Afterward, as they lay entwined, Clara traced the scars on Elias's chest marks from his life, before the mountains, from the fight with the Pinkertons, from years of hard living. "Do you regret it?" she asked. "The path that brought you here?" "How can I regret something that brought me to you?" he replied, and meant it. The winter settled over them like a heavy blanket. For days at a time, they couldn't leave the cabin except to tend the most necessary tasks. But instead of the crushing isolation Elias had warned about, Clara found a strange peace in it. They developed routines that became rituals. Morning coffee shared in silence as they watched the sun paint the snow-covered peaks gold. Afternoon reading sessions where they'd take turns with books, Clara's clear voice bringing new life to stories Elias had read dozens of times. Evening conversations by the fire that ranged from philosophical debates to silly jokes that left them both laughing until their sides hurt. Clara discovered that Elias had a talent for carving his hands, creating intricate figures from pine and aspen. He made her a set of hair combs decorated with mountain flowers, each petal carefully detailed. She wove him a new shirt on his loom, having mastered the technique with surprising speed, adding patterns she'd learned from her grandmother. They also discovered the shadows each carried. Clara would sometimes wake screaming from nightmares where her father called for help, She couldn't give where Harlan's hands closed around her throat. Elias would go silent for hours sometimes, lost in memories of violence of the moment when he'd had to choose between law and justice. But they learned to navigate these dark moments together. Clara would sing when Elias went quiet, old mountain ballads her mother had taught her until the music brought him back. Elias would hold Clara after nightmares, not trying to explain them away, but simply being present, solid, real. One particularly fierce storm trapped them inside for nearly a week. By the fourth day, Clara was pacing like a caged animal. "I need to do something," she said. "Anything. I'm going mad." "Cabin fever," Elias diagnosed. "Happens to everyone their first winter. How did you stand it 10 winters alone?" "I went a little mad, I think," he admitted. "Used to have long conversations with the wind. Named all the trees within a mile radius. Spent one entire winter writing a treatise on the philosophy of isolation that I burned come spring because it was complete nonsense." Clara laughed, despite her frustration. "And now I have you to keep me sane or drive me crazy in entirely different ways." She threw a cushion at him, which led to a mock battle that ended with them both breathless on the floor, laughing like children. It was in moments like these that Clara realized how young Elias actually was, only 35, despite the gray in his hair and the weight in his eyes. The mountains had aged him, but she was slowly teaching him to be young again. As winter deepened, they received an unexpected visitor. Sheriff Watson himself made the treacherous journey up the mountain, arriving half-frozen and exhausted. "There's trouble brewing," he said once they'd gotten him warmed and fed. "Some of Harlan's old associates from back east. They're claiming his confession was coerced, that his death was murder. They're sending investigators." "Let them come," Elias said coldly. "That's just it, they're coming. Here. They seem to think you or Mrs. Boone might have had something to do with Harlan's death." "We were here," Clara pointed out, 20 miles from town in the middle of nowhere." "I know that. Most folks know that. But these city types, they've got ideas about mountain justice. They're talking about exhuming Harlan's body, checking for signs of foul play." "And if they find them?" Elias asked. Watson shrugged. "Then we've got a murder investigation. And you two having the most reason to want him dead." "We'd be the prime suspects," Clara finished. They spent a tense evening discussing options. Watson urged them to come to town to be visible and cooperative, but the passes were dangerous and leaving their home undefended felt wrong. "We stay," Elias decided finally. "If they want to talk to us, they can make the same journey you did, Sheriff. We've got nothing to hide." Watson left the next morning, promising to send word when he knew more. Clara watched him disappear into the swirling snow, anxiety gnawing at her stomach. "What if they try to frame us?" she asked. "Then we fight," Elias said simply. Together. The investigators arrived 2 weeks later. 3 men in city clothes, wholly inappropriate for the mountains, accompanied by a guide who looked embarrassed to be leading them. Clara watched from the window as they approached their horses, struggling through the snowdrifts. "Mr. Boone," the lead investigator called. "We need to speak with you and your wife." Elias stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand, but not aimed. "Speak then." "I'm Detective Morrison from the Pinkerton Agency." The rifle swung up immediately. "Pinkertons aren't welcome here." "We're not here about old business, Mr. Boone. We're investigating the death of Josiah Harlan. Man confessed and hanged himself. What's to investigate? The nature of that confession, for one, and whether his death was truly suicide." Clara appeared beside Elias. "Would you prefer to freeze to death discussing this, or would you like to come inside?" The investigators looked at each other, clearly torn between duty and comfort. Comfort won. They entered the cabin warily, looking around as if expecting to find evidence of crime in the cozy domesticity. "You keep a lovely home, Mrs. Boone," Morrison said, trying for pleasantness. "Thank you. Now what do you really want?" Morrison cleared his throat. "Where were you both on the night of October 15th? "Here," Elias said flatly. "Where we've been since our wedding. Can anyone verify that—" "The mountains don't provide alibis, Detective." "You had reasons to want Harlan dead. So did half the town," Clara pointed out. "He was a parasite who destroyed lives for profit." "That's a harsh assessment." "That's a kind assessment. Would you like to hear the harsh one? Morrison pulled out a notebook. You claim you've been here continuously since your wedding, but Timothy Parsons says he visited you on October 12th. The journey from here to town is 2 days. You could have made it down and back. In October, with early snow, Elias laughed. You barely made it up here with a guide in good weather. You think we snuck down in a blizzard, murdered a man in a locked cell, and snuck back without anyone noticing? Stranger things have happened in these mountains, or so I'm told. The questioning continued for hours. The investigators had clearly done their homework, knew about Elias's past, about Clara's father, about every grievance against Harland. But they had no evidence, just suspicions and theories. Finally, as darkness fell, Clara had had enough. Gentlemen, you're welcome to stay the night rather than attempt the descent in darkness. But this interrogation is over. We've answered your questions. We were here. We didn't kill Harland. If someone did, perhaps you should investigate the dozen other families he destroyed rather than harassing the 2 people who've been living quietly in the mountains. Morrison wanted to protest, but his companions were already accepting the offer of shelter. They couldn't afford to alienate their host completely, not when the alternative was freezing to death on the mountain. That night, as the investigators slept by the fire, Clara and Elias lay awake in their bed, speaking in whispers. Do you think someone killed him? Clara asked. Does it matter? He's dead. Justice of one sort or another was served. It matters if they try to blame us for it. Elias was quiet for a moment. There's something I should tell you. That night, October 15th, I did leave the cabin. Clara stiffened. What? Not to go to town. I was checking the trap lines, but I met someone on the mountain, someone who shouldn't have been there. Who? Your brother. Clara sat up. James. But he was with the Thompsons. He was, but he'd run away, came up here looking for you. He was half frozen. I found him, warmed him up, sent him back with strict instructions to never try that again. Why didn't you tell me? Because he begged me not to. He was ashamed of worrying you. But Clara, he was here that night, all night. If the investigators check with the Thompsons, they'll find he was missing. You think James... I think a boy who loved his sister might have decided to take justice into his own hands. I think he might have snuck down to town while I thought he was sleeping, done what he felt needed doing, and come back. He's 14 years old. I was 15 when I killed my first man, defending my family's farm. Age doesn't mean much when it comes to protecting people you love. Clara felt her world spinning. We can't let them suspect James. We won't. But Clara, if it comes to it, if they need someone to blame, I'll take it. I've got the history for it. They'd believe it of me. No, absolutely not. We're not sacrificing you for anyone. Not even your brother. James wouldn't want that. And I won't lose you, Elias. Not now. The next morning, the investigators prepared to leave. Morrison made one last attempt. Mr. Boone, if you know something, anything about Harland's death, now is the time to tell us. Elias met his gaze steadily. I know he was an evil man who hurt a lot of people. I know he's dead. And I know that sometimes the mountains have their own justice. That's all I know. Morrison studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. The mountain's justice. Yes, I've heard about that. Avalanches that only hit certain cabins. Wolves that only hunt certain men. Storms that rise from nowhere to swallow the guilty. Superstition, one of his companions scoffed. Maybe, Morrison said. Or maybe Mr. Boone is right. Maybe the mountains decided Josiah Harlan had lived long enough. They left without further questions, their horses picking their way carefully down the treacherous path. Clara and Elias watched until they disappeared from view. Do you think they'll be back? Clara asked. No, Morrison's smarter than he looks. He knows there's no case here, and I think he doesn't really want to find one. Why? Did you notice his name, Morrison? Same as the doctor who questioned Harlan's activities. I'd bet they're related. Might be he's not as interested in finding Harlan's killer as his employers think. That evening, a snowstorm rolled in, sealing the mountain passes completely. They wouldn't see another soul until spring. Clara stood at the window watching the snow fall and felt relief wash over her. It's over, she said. Really over. Elias wrapped his arms around her from behind. No, he said softly. It's just beginning. She turned in his arms. What do you mean? I mean we've been living in crisis since we met. First the wedding, then Harlan's men, then his death, now this investigation. But that's all done. Now we get to find out who we are when we're not fighting for survival. Now we get to build a life that's about more than just staying alive. And what kind of life do you want to build, Elias Boone? He was quiet for a moment, considering. I want to wake up every morning knowing you're beside me. I want to teach you everything I know about these mountains and learn everything you can teach me about living with another person. I want your brother to visit and not have to sneak up here in the dead of night. I want... He paused suddenly, uncertain. What? Clara prompted gently. I want children, he admitted. Sons and daughters who grow up free in these mountains, who know both solitude and companionship, who never have to choose between law and justice because they'll help build a world where they're the same thing. Clara's eyes filled with tears. Yes, she whispered. Yes to all of it. As if in response to their declaration, the storm intensified, sealing them in their mountain sanctuary. But they didn't feel trapped. They felt free. Free from the past, free from judgment, free to build something new and valuable and theirs. That night, as they made love with the storm raging outside, Clara whispered, I love you, Elias Boone. And I love you, Clara Boone. He replied, the words coming easier now. Later, as they lay listening to the wind howl, Clara said, We never did find out who killed Harland. Does it matter? She considered. No, I suppose it doesn't. But in the darkness, Elias remembered the look on young James's face when he'd shown up that night, the grim determination of someone who'd made a hard choice. He remembered the boy's clothes damp with more than snow. He remembered the scratch on James's hand that looked like it could have come from picking a lock. Some secrets, Elias decided, were worth keeping. Some justice was best left to the mountains and the people who understood them. And sometimes protecting family meant never asking questions whose answers you already knew. Outside, the storm continued, burying all tracks, all evidence, all connections to the world below. Inside, two people who'd found each other in the most unlikely circumstances built their life together, one day at a time, one choice at a time, one love at a time. Spring would come, eventually bringing visitors and news and connections to the world below. James would visit, growing taller and broader, his eyes holding shadows that hadn't been there before, but also a peace that came from protecting what he loved. The investigation into Harlan's death would be quietly closed, officially ruled a suicide, the investigators concluding that mountain justice was beyond their jurisdiction. But all that was still to come. For now, in the depths of winter, Elias and Clara Boone had each other, their cabin, their mountains, and the knowledge that they'd chosen this life not from desperation, but from love. Spring arrived with violent beauty. That year, avalanches thundering down distant peaks as the snow released its grip on the mountains. Clara stood on the porch, her hand resting on her still flat belly, watching the world transform from white to green. She hadn't told Elias yet about the child growing within her, wanting to be certain, wanting the moment to be perfect. The first visitors of the season arrived on a morning when the wildflowers had just begun to bloom. Clara recognized the horses before the riders, James taller now and broader through the shoulders, accompanied by Dr. Morrison and, surprisingly, Sheriff Watson. Sister, James called out, his voice cracking slightly with emotion and the remnants of adolescence. Clara flew down the steps, catching her brother in an embrace that nearly knocked them both over. He was 15 now, she realized with a start. Almost a man. When had that happened? You've grown, she said, pulling back to look at him properly. Mountain air agrees with me, he said, with a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. There was something different about him, a weight to his gaze that reminded her uncomfortably of Elias when he spoke of the Pinkertons. James, Elias said, stepping out of the cabin. The two males regarded each other with an understanding that made Clara's heart race. Did Elias know? Did James know that he knew Mr. Boone? James said formally. Then softer, Elias, thank you for taking care of her. She takes care of herself mostly. I just try to keep up. Dr. Morrison cleared his throat. Mrs. Boone, I apologize for the intrusion, but we need to discuss some matters. Privately, if possible. Whatever you have to say can be said in front of my husband, Clara said firmly. The doctor glanced at the sheriff, who nodded. Very well. It's about your father's estate. We've discovered some additional documents hidden in his workshop. Documents that suggest Harlan's crimes went deeper than anyone suspected. They moved inside, James staying close to Clara's side as if afraid she might disappear. The doctor produced a leather portfolio weathered and water-stained. Your father was investigating Harlan for months before his death, Morrison explained. He discovered that Harlan was part of a larger conspiracy involving the railroad's several territorial officials and what amounts to organized crime back east. The forced marriages weren't just about personal gain, they were about controlling land rights along proposed railway routes. My God, Clara breathed. How many others? At least 12 that we've documented. Young women married off to Harlan's associates their family lands, then mysteriously changing hands. Some of the women died shortly after suspicious accidents, sudden illnesses. Like my father, Clara said coldly. Exactly like your father. He was going to expose it all. These documents prove it. Elias leaned forward. Why bring this to us now? Harlan's dead. It's over. Sheriff Watson spoke up. That's just it. It's not over. Harlan was just one tentacle of something bigger. His death has made the others nervous. They're cleaning house, destroying evidence, threatening witnesses. We need these documents to stop them, but legally they belong to Clara as her father's heir. Take them, Clara said immediately. Take them all. It's not that simple, Morrison said. You'd need to testify, both of you potentially, in Denver in federal court. It would mean leaving the mountains possibly for weeks. Clara felt Elias tense beside her, leaving the mountains, returning to civilization courts and lawyers and all the things they'd fled. She took his hand. We'll think about it, she said. Give us time to discuss it. The men nodded understanding. James, however, wasn't finished. There's something else, he said quietly. Something I need to tell you. About that night. The night Harlan died. The room went very still. Clara's grip on Elias's hand tightened. James, Sheriff Watson said carefully, anything you say here. I know what I'm saying, James interrupted. I was there. In town. I'd run away from the Thompsons to find Clara, but I got turned around in the storm. I ended up in town instead of the mountains. I was cold looking for shelter, and I saw someone leaving the jail. Who? Morrison asked, though his tone suggested he already knew. Mrs. Thompson, James said, and Clara gasped. She was carrying something, a key, I think. She didn't see me. I followed her home, watched through the window as she burned something in the fireplace. Then I left, made my way up the mountain where Elias found me. Margaret Thompson. Clara couldn't believe it. The woman was 60 years old, a church-going grandmother who'd taken James in out of Christian charity. Her daughter was one of them, Watson said quietly. One of Harlan's forced marriages 5 years ago. The girl died within 6 months, fell downstairs supposedly. Mrs. Thompson never believed it was an accident. You knew? Elias asked sharply. I suspected. Several people had opportunity and motive, but without evidence, Watson shrugged. And frankly, I wasn't looking too hard for any. So you're just going to let her get away with it? Morrison asked, though he too seemed more curious than outraged. Get away with what? Watson asked mildly. Young James here saw an old woman out for a walk on a cold night. Could have been anyone. Could have been a trick of the light. Boy was half frozen, probably seeing things. James nodded slowly, understanding the game. Yes, sir. The cold plays tricks on your mind. They all sat in silence for a moment, a conspiracy of understanding settling over them. Then Clara asked, Mrs. Sell, Thompson doesn't know that James saw her. No, James said. And she doesn't need to. She's been nothing but kind to me. Like a grandmother. I won't take that away from her. Clara felt tears prick her eyes. Her little brother forced to grow up too fast, keeping terrible secrets to protect others. She pulled him close. You did the right thing, she whispered. All of it. Every choice you made. Over James's head, she saw Elias nod slightly. He'd known, or at least suspected, and he'd kept the secret to protect them all. After the officials left with the documents and promises to return for their testimony if needed, James remained. He helped Elias with the spring repairs, learned to track deer, spent hours talking with Clara about everything and nothing. On his third night, as they sat around the fire, James asked, "Are you happy here, Clara, truly?" "Happier than I've ever been," she answered honestly. "It's hard sometimes, lonely sometimes, but it's real. It's ours." "The Thompsons want to formally adopt me," James said suddenly. "Make me their legal son. Their own boy died in the war, and they say I've brought life back to their home." "That's wonderful," Clara said, though her heart ached at the thought of losing him even more completely. "It would mean taking their name, James Thompson, instead of James Wynne." "Names don't change who we are to each other," Elias said quietly. "Family is family, whatever they're called." James smiled gratefully at his brother-in-law. "Would you teach me something before I go, something important?" "What's that?" "How to be a good man, a protector, like you." Elias was quiet for a long moment. "I'm not sure I'm the best teacher for that lesson. You protected Clara when no one else would. You gave up your freedom, your gold, everything to save her. That seems like a good man to me. I've killed James. That marks a person. To save innocence, to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. If that marks you, then I want to bear the same mark." Clara watched the two men in her life, her husband and her brother, and saw the moment Elias accepted the responsibility James was placing on him. "All right," Elias said. "But the first lesson is this: violence is always the last resort. Always. The moment you become comfortable with it, you lose part of your soul." They spent the next days in intensive training, not just fighting, though Elias did teach James to defend himself, but observation strategy, reading people and situations, how to recognize danger before it struck, how to de-escalate conflicts, how to protect without destroying. "Fear is your friend," Elias told him as they practiced in the clearing behind the cabin. "It keeps you sharp, keeps you human. The day you stop feeling fear is the day you become what you fight against." "Were you afraid that day with the Pinkertons?" "Terrified. But more afraid of what would happen if I didn't act. And with Harland, same thing. The fear of inaction outweighed the fear of consequences." James absorbed it all with an intensity that reminded Clara of their father when he'd been working on a particularly challenging problem. She watched from the porch, her hand unconsciously protecting her belly, and knew that James would carry these lessons with him forever. The night before James was to leave, Clara finally told them both about the baby. James whooped with joy, spinning her around until she begged him to stop. Elias went very still, his face cycling through emotions too quickly to read, before settling on something that looked like awe. "A baby," he whispered. "Our baby. Due in the fall, I think. I haven't seen a doctor, but I know the signs." "This changes everything," Elias said. "We'll need to expand the cabin, make it safer. We'll need supplies, medicine. We'll need to breathe," Clara interrupted, laughing. "Women have been having babies in these mountains for generations. We'll be fine." But she saw the fear in his eyes, the protector's instinct already extending to their unborn child. That night, he held her like she was made of glass, whispering promises and plans against her skin. James left the next morning with promises to return before the baby came. As his horse disappeared down the trail, Clara felt a chapter closing. Her little brother was becoming a man, making his own choices, keeping his own secrets. And she was becoming something new too, not just wife, but soon to be mother. "You knew," she said to Elias as they stood watching the empty trail, "about James and that night." "I suspected." "And you said nothing." "Some truths are too heavy for words. He did what he felt he had to do. Just like I did with the Pinkertons, just like you did when you stood up to Harland in that church. We're all killers then in our way." "No," Elias said firmly. "We're all protectors. There's a difference." Summer bloomed fully across the mountains, and with it came unexpected challenges. The federal investigators arrived as promised, but they brought disturbing news. Harland's associates had hired their own investigators. Dangerous men who weren't above using violence to silence witnesses. "We can protect you," the lead federal agent promised. "Move you somewhere safe until after the trial." "This is somewhere safe," Elias responded flatly. "These are my mountains. Anyone comes here meaning harm, they won't leave." "Mr. Boone, These aren't local thugs. These are professional killers from Chicago and New York. They've already eliminated 2 witnesses. Then they've never faced a man defending his pregnant wife on his own ground, Elias said with quiet certainty that made even the federal agents step back. They posted guards anyway, men who tried to be inconspicuous, but stood out like sore thumbs in the wilderness. Elias tolerated them for Clara's sake, but he conducted his own defensive preparations. Traps along the lesser-known trails. Cache sites with ammunition and supplies. Plans within plans, the strategic mind that had kept him alive for 10 years in exile now focused on protecting his growing family. Clara, for her part, refused to be relegated to passive protection. She practiced with the rifle until she could consistently hit targets at 300 yards. She learned Elias's trap systems, memorized escape routes, prepared her own contingencies. "You're not going to sideline me because I'm carrying a child," she told him firmly when he protested her climbing to one of his lookout posts. "Clara, you're 6 months pregnant, and still perfectly capable of defending our home. This child will be born to parents who stand together, fight together. That's the legacy I want to give." The attack came on a night when the federal guards had grown complacent, lulled by weeks of mountain quiet. Clara woke first, some instinct alerting her to danger. She touched Elias's shoulder, and he came instantly alert. "How many?" he whispered. "At least 4, maybe more." They moved like ghosts through their own home, taking predetermined positions. Through the window, Clara could see shapes moving through the darkness, professionals moving with purpose and skill. But they didn't know the terrain like Elias did. The first man to approach triggered one of Elias's warning systems, a carefully balanced stack of rocks that tumbled noisily. The intruder froze, giving away his position. Clara's shot took him in the shoulder, spinning him to the ground. Then chaos erupted. Gunfire shattered the night muzzle flashes, lighting up the darkness like deadly fireworks. The federal guards, finally alert, joined the fight, but they were pinned down near their camp. "They're trying to flank us," Elias said, tracking movement through the trees. "The old mine shaft," Clara said, understanding immediately. They'd prepared for this. She moved to the back window while Elias covered the front. Sure enough, 2 men were approaching from the blind side, or what they thought was the blind side. Clara let them get close, let them think they were undetected, then fired through the specially modified gun port they'd installed. 1 man fell, the other scrambled for cover. "Clara Boone," a voice called out. "We just want the documents. Give them up and we leave peaceful." "The documents are already with the federal prosecutors," Clara shouted back. "You're too late. Then we'll settle for making sure you never testify." "You're welcome to try," Elias roared, and his rifle boomed, finding another target in the darkness. The battle raged for an hour, the attackers gradually realizing they'd severely underestimated their prey. These weren't scared witnesses to be easily eliminated. These were mountain people defending their home, their unborn child, their life together. Finally, as dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, they heard horses retreating fast down the mountain. The surviving attackers had fled. 2 bodies remained, men who'd learned too late that mountain justice was swift and final. The federal agents emerged from their positions shamefaced and shaken. "We need to get you to safety," one insisted. "They'll come back with more men." "No," Clara said with certainty. "They won't." She was right. Word spread quickly through certain circles that the Boone cabin was a fortress, its inhabitants too dangerous to tackle. The conspiracy leaders, already facing federal prosecution, decided that 2 witnesses weren't worth losing more expensive hired guns. The trial proceeded without them having to leave the mountains. Their sworn depositions, along with the documents Clara's father had compiled, were enough to convict 12 men of conspiracy, fraud, and murder. The forced marriage scheme was exposed, compensation paid to victims' families, and new laws enacted to prevent such abuses. "It's really over now," Clara said as they read the news of the convictions. "All of it." "Good," Elias said, his hand resting on her enormous belly, "because we're about to have our hands full with something more important." The baby came early on a night when the first snow of autumn dusted the peaks. Clara's labor was long and difficult, with only Elias to help her through it. He'd delivered calves and foals, but this was different. This was his wife, his child, his entire world struggling to bring new life. "I can't," Clara gasped after 12 hours of labor. "You can," Elias said firmly, though fear clawed at his chest. "You're the strongest person I know. You stood up to Harlan, survived a siege, fought off professional killers while pregnant. You can do this. Together, she pleaded. Together. Always. 3 hours later, their daughter's cry pierced the mountain air, strong, healthy, alive. Elias caught the baby with shaking hands, cleared her airways, wrapped her in the blankets Clara had prepared months ago. She's perfect, he whispered, tears streaming down his face as he placed the baby on Clara's chest. What should we call her? Clara asked, exhausted but radiant. Hope, Elias said, without hesitation. Hope Elizabeth Boone. Because that's what she is, hope for the future. Hope that the world can be better than what we've known. As if in agreement, baby Hope opened her eyes gray like her father's, but already showing flecks of her mother's green, and gazed solemnly at her parents. They were still marveling at her tiny fingers and toes when they heard horses approaching. Elias reached for his rifle, but Clara recognized the riders. It's James, she said, and the Thompsons. They'd come for the birth, bringing supplies and support. Mrs. Thompson, the woman who'd quietly delivered her own justice to Josiah Harland, took charge with grandmotherly efficiency. She examined Clara, and the baby declared them both healthy and set about making the new mother comfortable. You did well, she told Elias quietly. Not many men could have managed this. Not many women could have survived it, he replied, watching Clara nurse their daughter with James hovering nearby, already the protective uncle. We're stronger than they think, we mountain women, Mrs. Thompson said with a knowing smile. We do what needs doing, whether it's birthing babies or... She trailed off, but her meaning was clear. Thank you, Elias said simply, for everything. We protect our own, she replied. That's what family does. As autumn deepened toward winter, the Boone cabin became a gathering place for an extended family bound not by blood, but by choice, by shared trials, by the understanding that sometimes justice comes not from courts, but from the courage of ordinary people willing to do extraordinary things. Clara stood on the porch one evening, Hope sleeping in her arms, watching Elias and James work together to expand the cabin for their growing family. The sun was setting, painting the mountains gold and rose, and she thought about the journey that had brought them here, a forced marriage that became real love, a mountain exile that became a sanctuary, a desperate escape that became a chosen life. No regrets, Elias asked, coming up beside her, sawdust in his hair and love in his eyes. None, Clara said firmly. Not one. In the distance, a wolf howled, not a threat, but a greeting, one predator acknowledging another's territory. Elias howled back, making baby Hope stir, but not wake. She was a mountain child, already comfortable with the wild sounds of her home. What are you thinking? Clara asked, seeing something shift in his expression. That Sheriff Watson was asking if I'd consider becoming his deputy, official-like. The territory's growing needs lawmen who understand both justice and law. And I'm thinking our daughter deserves to grow up in a world where her father doesn't have to hide, where protection doesn't require isolation. You'd go back to town. Part-time, maybe. Still keep the cabin, still live here mostly, but be part of the world again. Help shape it into something better for Hope. Clara considered this the man who'd lived in exile for 10 years now, ready to rejoin civilization on his own terms. I think, she said slowly, that's exactly what we should do. Show them that mountain people aren't separate from the law we're part of. The best part, the part that remembers why laws exist in the first place. Together. Always together. As if in response to her parents' commitment, Hope opened her eyes and gurgled contentedly. Above them, the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, and somewhere in the forest that wolf howled again, a sound that had once meant loneliness to Elias, but now meant home. The winter closed in around them, but they were ready for it. More than ready, they welcomed it. Because now it wasn't a season of isolation, but of incubation, their little family growing stronger and closer as the snow piled high outside. James stayed through the first blizzard, learning to care for his niece, telling her stories about her brave parents, even though she was too young to understand. The Thompsons visited when weather permitted, bringing news from town and taking back reports of the baby's growth. One night, as a particularly fierce storm raged outside, Clara asked, "Do you think Hope will understand when she's older?" the choices we made, the violence that brought us together. I think, Elias said carefully, she'll understand that sometimes the world forces impossible choices on good people, and that her parents chose to fight for each other for her, for the possibility of something better. Will you tell her about the Pinkertons? When she's old enough. Just like we'll tell her about her grandfather's investigation, her mother's courage in that church, the siege that tried to break us. We'll tell her all of it because those stories are part of her story. Clara nodded, then smiled. We'll have to clean up the language a bit. Can't have our daughter's first words being the ones you used when those federal agents let the attackers get so close. Elias chuckled, the sound still somewhat rusty, but becoming more natural. Fair point. As the winter deepened, they received word that the last of Harlan's conspirators had been sentenced. The forced marriage scheme was completely dismantled. The victims compensated, the perpetrators imprisoned or fled. Clara's father's work, completed posthumously, had saved dozens of families from similar fates. He would have been proud, Clara said, reading the letter from the federal prosecutor. To know his investigation made such a difference. He would have been proud of you, Elias corrected, for having the courage to stand up, speak out, fight back, for turning tragedy into justice. Hope chose that moment to wake demanding attention with imperious cries. As Clara nursed her, Elias began planning the addition to the cabin, a proper nursery, maybe another bedroom for when more children came. Because they would come, he was certain. This life they were building was too full of love for just one child. The badge felt heavier than Elias remembered, as Sheriff Watson pinned it to his chest on a crisp March morning. Deputy Marshal Elias Boone. The title sounded foreign after years of being nothing more than the mountain man, the hermit, the killer who'd found redemption in isolation. Never thought I'd see the day, Watson said, stepping back to admire his handiwork. The ghost of the mountains wearing a lawman's star again. Neither did I. Elias admitted, his hand touching the metal briefly. Beside him, Clara shifted Hope to her other hip, the 1-year-old reaching curious fingers toward the shiny object on her father's chest. Pretty, Hope declared one of her dozen words, and everyone laughed. That's right, little one, Watson said. Your papa's going to help keep the territory pretty safe. The ceremony was small, just family and a few townspeople who'd come to respect the Boones over the past year. Mrs. Thompson was there, her eyes holding that knowing look she'd worn since the night of Harlan's death. James stood tall in his new suit, looking every inch the respectable young man the Thompsons had helped him become. Part-time, remember, Clara reminded Watson. 3 days a week in town, the rest on the mountain. Wouldn't dream of taking him away from you full-time, Mrs. Boone. Besides having a deputy who knows every trail, every hideout, every secret path in these mountains, that's worth more than having him sit in the office every day. The arrangement was unusual but practical. Elias would handle the mountain jurisdiction, the disputes between miners, the occasional bandits who thought the high country meant easy pickings. He'd also investigate crimes that required someone who could track a man across stone and snow, who could read the mountains like others read books. Their first test came sooner than expected. 2 weeks after Elias took the oath, a gold shipment vanished between the mountain mines and the town bank. The guards were found dead, the strongbox gone the trail, cold by the time anyone discovered the crime. Inside job, Watson said, studying the scene. Guards were shot from behind close range. They knew their killer. Elias knelt beside the bodies, reading signs others missed. 3 shooters, not one. See the angle of the wounds. And here, he pointed to barely visible boot prints, different sizes, different wear patterns. The Garrison brothers, Watson said grimly, they work security for the mine. Must have decided they deserved a bigger cut. They're heading high, Elias said, studying the faint trail leading up the mountain. Think they can lose us in the peaks? Can they? Elias smiled, but it held no warmth. Not for me. He was gone for 4 days, leaving Clara to manage the cabin and Hope alone, though James rode up to help after the first day. When Elias returned, he had the strongbox and 1 Garrison brother in custody. The other 2 had chosen to fight rather than surrender. They were buried in unmarked graves in the high country, the mountains claiming them as they'd claimed so many who thought violence was the answer to everything. Clean shot, both of them. the surviving brother told Watson, his voice mixing fear and grudging respect. Never seen anyone shoot like that in the dark, in the snow, like the mountain itself was against us. Clara noticed Elias grew quiet after that incident, the weight of killing settling on him again, even though it had been justified necessary. That night, as Hope slept between them, she'd been fussy, sensing her father's distress. Clara asked, "Do you regret taking the badge?" "No," he said after a long pause. "But I hoped I was done with killing. You killed to save the gold that pays honest miners' families. You killed because they chose death over surrender." "That's not the same as what the Pinkertons did. Isn't it I'm the law now, just like they claim to be?" Clara sat up fierce in her defense of him. "The law without justice is just violence with paperwork. You bring justice. You give people chances. You protect those who can't protect themselves. That's the difference." Before he could respond, they heard horses approaching fast, too fast for the narrow mountain trail at night. Elias was up instantly, rifle in hand, but the voice that called out made him lower it. "Elias, Clara, I need help." It was James, and he wasn't alone. As they rushed outside, they saw him supporting a young woman, barely conscious, blood soaking through her dress. "Found her on the road," James gasped as they helped carry her inside. "She's been shot. Said men are after her." Clara immediately went into action, her year of mountain living having taught her rough medicine. The bullet had passed through the woman's shoulder, missing anything vital but causing significant blood loss. "Who is she?" Elias asked as Clara worked. "Don't know. She kept saying can't let them find me before she passed out." As Clara cleaned and dressed the wound, Elias studied the woman. Young, maybe 20, with calloused hands that spoke of hard work. Her dress was quality fabric, but practical, not fancy. A working woman with some money, or someone who'd been given good clothes. "There," Clara said, tying off the bandage. "She'll live if infection doesn't set in." The woman's stirred eyes fluttering open. When she saw the badge on Elias's chest, she tried to scramble away. "No, please, you can't send me back." "Easy," Clara soothed. "No one's sending you anywhere. You're safe." "You don't understand," the woman gasped. "My husband, he'll kill me. He's already killed 2 women before me. The law won't help. He owns the law in our town." Elias and Clara exchanged looks. Another Harland, another forced situation. Another woman desperate enough to run into the mountains at night. "What's your name?" Clara asked gently. "Sarah?" "Sarah Winters. My husband is Marcus Winters. He owns the silver mine in Creekside." Elias knew the name. Winters was wealthy, powerful, connected. He'd also heard rumors women who disappeared workers who died in accidents after complaining about conditions. "He shot you?" Elias asked. "His men did. When I ran, I found out about the others, the wives before me, found their graves behind the old mill. When I confronted him," she shuddered. "He said I'd be joining them soon enough." "James, ride to town," Elias commanded. "Get Sheriff Watson. Tell him we need a federal marshal too. This is beyond local jurisdiction." "No." Sarah grabbed his arm. "Winters owns half the lawmen in 3 counties. They'll take me back to him." "Not Watson," Elias said firmly. "And not me. You have my word you're under my protection now." The next days were tense. Sarah recovered slowly, jumping at every sound certain Winters' men would find her. Clara rarely left her side, understanding the particular terror of being hunted by a man who claimed to own you. On the 3rd day they came. 8 men armed and aggressive, led by Marcus Winters himself. Elias met them at the boundary of his property badge, visible rifle ready. "Deputy Boone," Winters said smoothly, "I believe you're harboring my wife. Poor thing had a breakdown, shot herself in confusion. I'm here to take her home for proper care." "She says differently," Elias replied evenly. "Says you tried to kill her. Says you killed others before her. The delusions of a troubled mind. Surely you understand, having dealt with your own troubles. I heard you spent 10 years hiding in these mountains talking to trees." "I heard you like to bury wives behind old mills," Elias countered. "Funny what people hear." Winters' face darkened. "She's my legal wife. You have no authority to keep her from me." "Actually, I do." Sheriff Watson's voice came from behind Winters' group. He'd arrived with James and a federal marshal surrounding the would-be retrievers. See, Mrs. Winters has made some serious allegations. Until they're investigated, she's a protected witness. This is kidnapping, Winters snarled. This is justice, the federal marshal said, riding forward. Marcus Winters, you're under arrest for suspected murder, attempted murder, and conspiracy to obstruct justice. What happened next occurred almost too fast to follow. Winters pulled a hidden gun aimed at Sarah, who'd appeared in the cabin doorway. Elias's rifle spoke first, the shot taking Winters in the chest. Two of his men went for their weapons, but thought better of it when they found themselves looking down the barrels of multiple guns. Winters lay dying in the dirt, blood pooling beneath him. With his last breath, he gasped, "She's mine." "No," Sarah said, stepping fully outside for the first time since arriving. "I'm my own." The investigation that followed revealed the full extent of Winters' crimes. 3 dead wives, all listed as accidents or suicides. A dozen dead workers, all who'd threatened to expose dangerous mine conditions. A network of corruption that ran deep into local government. Sarah stayed with the Boones through it all, helping with hope, learning the rhythms of mountain life. She and James grew close, too close, Clara worried, given their ages and circumstances. "She's 21, I'm 17, James argued when Clara brought it up. "That's not so much difference." "She's been through trauma you can't imagine," Clara said gently. "She needs time to heal to find herself again." "I know that. I'm not pushing anything. I understand her. The weight of secrets, the need to protect the guilt of surviving when others didn't." Clara heard what he wasn't saying, that he still carried the weight of that night with Harland, the choice he'd made in darkness that had freed them all, but marked him forever. "Give her time," Clara advised. "If it's real, it will wait." Summer came with its usual glory, the mountains exploding with wildflowers and life. Hope took her first real steps in a meadow full of columbines toddling from Elias to Clara with delighted squeals. Sarah had decided to stay in the area, taking a job as a school teacher in town, but visiting the cabin often. "I never thought I'd feel safe again, Ma," she told Clara one evening as they watched the sunset. "But here with all of you, I'm starting to remember who I was before Marcus. Who were you? A girl who loved books and teaching. Who wanted children of her own someday, with a man who saw me as a partner, not property." "You'll have that," Clara said with certainty. "When you're ready." Sarah glanced toward where James was helping Elias repair the fence, his shirt off, and the summer heat muscles defined from hard work. "Maybe sooner than I thought." Clara smiled but said nothing. Time would tell. The peace was shattered in August when a rider arrived with urgent news. A gang of outlaws had taken over a mining camp high in the mountains, holding the workers hostage, demanding ransom from the mining company. "It's the Colson gang," Watson told Elias. 12 men, all killers. The mining company wants to pay, but I think they'll kill the hostages anyway." "How many hostages?" "So, 30 miners plus their families. Maybe 50 people total, including children." Elias felt the familiar cold settle over him, the clarity that came when violence was inevitable. "I'll need backup." "I'm coming," James said immediately. "No," Elias and Clara said in unison. "I'm 18 now. I know these mountains. I can shoot. You need me." Sarah grabbed James's arm. "Don't you dare. Don't you dare leave me now." James looked at her surprised. They'd been dancing around their feelings for months, neither quite ready to acknowledge what was growing between them. "Sarah, I lost one man to violence. I won't lose another. Please." "I have to go. Those are innocent people. Children." Sarah pulled him down and kissed him fiercely, surprising everyone, including herself. "Then you come back. You hear me, James Thompson? You come back to me." "I promise," James whispered against her lips. Elias Watson. James and 4 other deputies made the climb to the mining camp under cover of darkness. The scene they found was worse than expected. The Colson gang had already killed 2 miners as examples, their bodies hanging from the camp's entrance as a warning. "We go in quiet," Elias planned. "Take out the sentries, free the hostages before the main group knows we're here." "That's suicide," one deputy protested. 12 against 7. 11, James corrected. "I counted. One must be inside with the hostages. Elias looked at his brother-in-law with new respect. The boy had his father's sharp mind, his sister's courage. They struck at dawn when the gang was least alert. Elias and James took the sentries silently, skills learned in different ways but equally effective. The other deputies positioned themselves around the camp while Watson freed the hostages. The firefight when it came was brutal but brief. The gang caught between the deputies' crossfire and the mountain itself. Elias had triggered a small rock slide to block their escape, surrendered after losing half their members. Bill Colson himself tried to make a last stand using a child as a shield. James shot him through the eye at 50 yards a shot that would become legend in the territory. The child was unharmed, running to her mother's arms. "Hell of a shot," Elias said quietly. James was staring at Colson's body, his face pale. "First man I've killed," he said, though Elias knew that might not be entirely true. "First one I'm certain of anyway." "How does it feel?" "Necessary," James said after a pause. "But heavy. Is it always heavy?" "If you're doing it right, yes. The day it stops being heavy is the day you become like them." They returned to heroes' welcomes, but James went straight to Sarah, collapsing into her arms. She held him as he shook, understanding that killing, even justified killing, left marks that never fully healed. "I'm proud of you," she whispered, "and I'm so glad you're home." That night, as the town celebrated, Elias found himself standing apart with Clara and Hope. The toddler was fascinated by the festivities, pointing at everything with excited babbles. "You saved them all," Clara said. 50 innocent people. "We saved them. James's shot, Watson's leadership, the deputy's courage. I was just one part, the essential part, the one who could track them, find them, plan the assault. The one who's good at killing," Elias said bitterly. Clara turned him to face her. "The one who's good at protecting. There's a difference, remember? You taught me that." Before Elias could respond, they heard commotion from the town square. Marcus Winter's mine foreman had arrived drunk and belligerent, demanding Sarah be returned to the mine's ownership since she was still technically Winter's property. "The bastard's dead, but his debts aren't," the foreman shouted. "That includes his wife. She belongs to the mine now." Sarah stood frozen, the terror returning to her eyes. But before Elias could intervene, James stepped forward. "She belongs to no one," James said clearly. "But if you need something official, then know this Sarah Winters is under my protection, and I intend to marry her." The crowd gasped. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth. The foreman laughed. You're just a boy." "I'm the boy who put a bullet through Bill Colson's eye at 50 yards while he held a child hostage," James said calmly. "I'm the boy who helped take down the gang that terrorized these mountains, and I'm the man who loves Sarah and will kill anyone who tries to harm her." The foreman's hand moved toward his gun, but froze when he found Elias's rifle aimed at his head. "I wouldn't," Elias advised mildly. "My brother-in-law made a declaration. In these mountains, that means something." Sheriff Watson stepped forward. "Besides, any claims on Mrs. Winters died with her husband. She's a free woman, able to marry whoever she chooses. If she chooses." All eyes turned to Sarah. She walked slowly to James, studying his face. "You barely know me," she said softly. "I know you're brave enough to run from a monster, strong enough to survive being shot, kind enough to help with hope even when your own heart was breaking. I know you laugh at my terrible jokes and make the best cornbread I've ever tasted. I know I want to spend the rest of my life learning everything else." Sarah looked at Clara, who nodded encouragingly, then at Elias, who gave his own quiet approval. "Yes," Sarah said simply. "Yes, I'll marry you, James Thompson." The crowd erupted in cheers, the foreman slinking away defeated. Another mountain wedding was in the works, but this one would be born of love, not desperation. As summer turned to autumn, the Boone homestead expanded again. James and Sarah built their own cabin a short ride from Elias and Clara's, close enough for family, but far enough for privacy. The wedding was held in the meadow where Hope had taken her first steps with Clara as matron of honor and Elias as best man. "Funny how things circle around," Clara said that night as they lay in bed, Hope finally asleep after the excitement. A desperate wedding in a church led to real love. Now James's real love gets the wedding I should have had. Would you change it? Elias asked. Our beginning. Not a single moment. Every terrible thing led to this, to us, to Hope, to the family we've built. A cry from the next room interrupted them. Hope had woken as she often did, demanding attention. But as Clara moved to get up, she suddenly clutched her stomach. Clara! I think... She gasped, then smiled through obvious discomfort. I think Hope's about to become a big sister. What? But you haven't said how long? 3 months. I wanted to be sure. The baby's coming early, just like Hope did. The next hours were a blur. James and Sarah arrived summoned by the emergency. Sarah took charge of Hope while James rode for Mrs. Thompson and the doctor. But the baby, like everything else in the Boone family story, refused to wait for convenient timing. Elias delivered his son as the first snow of the season began to fall, the boy arriving with a lusty cry that announced his presence to the mountains themselves. They named him Thomas, after Clara's father, giving him the middle name Justice for what they'd all fought to achieve. 2 children, 2 cabins, extended family all around, Clara said exhaustedly as she nursed the newborn. We've built quite a life, Mr. Boone. We've built quite a family, Mrs. Boone, he corrected, kissing her forehead. Outside, the snow continued to fall, but inside the cabin, warmth and love prevailed. Hope toddled over to peer at her baby brother, patting his head with surprising gentleness. Mine, she asked, hopefully. Ours, Clara corrected. He's ours, sweet girl. All of this is ours. As if in response to some cosmic cue, they heard singing from outside. The townspeople, led by Sheriff Watson and Mrs. Thompson, had made the trek up the mountain despite the snow bringing food and gifts for the new baby. They stood in the snowy yard lanterns, creating circles of warm light. Voices raised in celebration. They came through the snow, Elias said, wonderstruck. All of them. Of course they did, Watson called out, hearing him through the window. That's what family does. And like it or not, Boone, your family now. To all of us. Elias stood in his doorway holding his son while Clara held Hope, looking out at the gathering of people who'd become their community. Sarah and James stood together, young love shining in their faces. Mrs. Thompson conducted the singing with grandmotherly authority. Sheriff Watson raised a flask and toast to the new arrival. 10 years alone, Elias murmured. Now this. Regrets? Clara asked, echoing their old ritual. None. Not one. The seasons would turn, bringing new challenges and joys. Hope would grow into a fierce little mountain girl equally comfortable with books and rifles. Thomas would show his grandfather's brilliant mind and his father's protective instincts. James and Sarah would have their own children, expanding the mountain clan further. There would be more crimes to solve, more innocence to protect, more justice to dispense. Elias would become famous throughout the territory as the deputy who could track a ghost through a blizzard, who brought law to the lawless places. Clara would become the unofficial doctor of the mountains, her skills with herbs and healing saving countless lives. But all of that was still to come. For now, on this snowy evening with a new baby in their arms and their chosen family singing in the yard, Elias and Clara Boone stood together in the doorway of the life they'd built from the ashes of desperation and loneliness. The mountains watched over them, ancient and protective, having witnessed the transformation of a lonely exile and a desperate bride into something stronger, a family forged by choice, tested by fire, and bound by love stronger than any law or contract. Look at that, Clara said softly, pointing to the sky where the snow had stopped and stars were beginning to appear. Even the heavens are celebrating. Or warning us that 2 children in a mountain cabin is going to be an adventure we're not prepared for, Elias said wryly. Clara laughed, the sound echoing off the peaks like a promise of joy to come. When have we ever been prepared for anything? We make it up as we go, remember to, together, Elias said, pulling his family closer. Together. Clara agreed, and in that word was everything, their past, their present, and their future, all bound up in a love that had begun with violence, but had transformed into something beautiful and lasting. The singers gradually dispersed, calling out final congratulations as they made their way back down the mountain. James and Sarah lingered, Sarah holding Hope, who'd fallen asleep despite the excitement. "Thank you," Sarah said quietly to Clara and Elias, "for taking me in, for giving me shelter when I needed it most, for showing me that love doesn't have to be about ownership and control." "You showed yourself that," Clara said. "We just gave you space to remember it." James shook Elias's hand man to man. "I understand now," he said, "about the weight of protecting others, about the cost of violence, about choosing love despite the darkness." "You always understood," Elias replied. "You just needed time to accept it." After they left, Elias and Clara settled by the fire with their children. Thomas slept peacefully in Clara's arms, while Hope curled against Elias's chest, her small hand clutching his shirt even in sleep. "Tell me we did the right thing," Clara said suddenly. "All of it, the violence, the secrets, the choices we made. We protected the innocent. We stood against evil. We built something good from something terrible. If that's not right, I don't know what is. But the cost, everything worth having comes with a cost. The question is whether we're willing to pay it, and whether we can live with the payment. Can you live with all of it?" Elias looked at his family, his wife who'd chosen him when she could have chosen freedom, his daughter who would grow up fearless, and free his son who would know from birth that he was loved and wanted. "Yes," he said simply, "because it brought me this. It brought me you." Clara leaned against him, careful not to disturb the sleeping children. Outside, the wind picked up, singing through the peaks, with a sound like distant voices, all those who'd come before, all those who'd sought sanctuary in these mountains, all those who'd learned that sometimes salvation comes from the most unexpected sources. The years had carved their stories into the mountains like rivers cutting through stone. Hope was 7, now wild as a mountain cat, but sharp as her grandfather's forgotten ledgers, while Thomas at 5 showed a gentleness that belied his father's capacity for necessary violence. They grew up knowing both sides of their heritage, the law and the wilderness, justice and mercy, the price of freedom and the value of family. It was a morning in late spring when the past came calling with a vengeance no one had anticipated. Elias was teaching Thomas to track deer when Hope came running, her young legs pumping furiously up the trail. "Papa Ryder's coming. Lots of them, Mama says. Come quick." Elias scooped up Thomas and ran, Hope keeping pace beside him with the natural ease of a child raised in thin mountain air. As they approached the cabin, he could see them 20 men, maybe more, arranged in a semicircle before his home. Clara stood on the porch, rifle in hand, but not raised her face calm despite the danger. The leader was a man Elias recognized, but had hoped never to see again, Colonel William Brackett, formerly of the Pinkerton Detective Agency, now running his own private army for hire. His hair had gone completely white in the 15 years since their last encounter, but his eyes remained cold as winter stone. "Elias Boone," Brackett called out. "Been a long time." "Not long enough," Elias replied, setting Thomas down and pushing both children behind him. "What do you want, Brackett?" "Justice, you might say, or revenge, depending on your perspective. You killed 3 of my men." "Your men were burning out a widow with her children inside. They got what they deserved. They were executing a legal eviction. They were committing murder." Brackett smiled, the expression never reaching his eyes. "Semantics. But that's not why I'm here, not really. You've built quite a reputation, Deputy Boone. The lawman who can't be bought, can't be intimidated, can't be killed. Bad for business, you understand." "Whose business?" "Progress, Mr. Boone. The railroad needs to expand through these mountains. The mining companies need fewer regulations. The timber concerns need access to protected lands, and you stand in the way of all of it." "I stand for the law. The old law. The inconvenient law. We're offering you a choice. Take your family and leave Colorado tonight. We've prepared a nice sum to help you relocate. $50,000, enough to live comfortably anywhere you choose. And if I refuse," Brackett's smile widened, "then we'll exercise our own legal options. You see, I've been doing research. Your brother-in-law James was in town the night Josiah Harlan died. Young Sarah has quite a past. Did you know she was wanted for theft in Kansas before she married Marcus Winters?" "Oh, that's been cleared up now, but it could be revisited. Your wife's father had debts to more people than just Harlan. Debts that could be called in. You're threatening my family. I'm explaining reality. Take the money and leave, or watch everything you've built crumble legally. Your choice. Before Elias could respond, another voice cut through the tension. Seems to me you're forgetting something, Colonel. Sheriff Watson emerged from the tree line with James and 15 deputized townsmen all armed. Sarah was with them, her teaching clothes replaced with riding gear, and a determined expression. This is a private conversation, Sheriff Tim, Brackett said coolly. Nothing's private when you bring 20 armed men into my jurisdiction without notice. That's technically an invasion, Colonel. I could arrest you all right now. You could try. The tension stretched taut, two small armies facing each other with the Boone family in the middle. It was Thomas who broke it, his 5-year-old voice cutting through the standoff with innocent clarity. Why are the bad men here, Papa? We're not bad men, son, Brackett said, trying for a grandfatherly tone. We're businessmen. Mama says businessmen who come with guns are just bandits with better clothes. Hope piped up, and several of Watson's men chuckled despite the danger. Brackett's face darkened. Mr. Boone, you have 24 hours to consider our offer. I'd think very carefully about your children's future. Touch my children, and I'll kill every last one of you, Elias said quietly, and something in his voice made even Brackett's hardened men step back. Threats, Deputy. Promises, Colonel. Brackett wheeled his horse around. 24 hours, Boone. Use them wisely. After they left, the assembled defenders gathered in the cabin. The main room that had once seemed spacious now felt cramped with so many bodies. They'll be back, Watson said unnecessarily. With more men, James added. This was just to test our response. We should take the children and run, Sarah suggested, holding her own infant daughter, little Mary, born just 6 months prior. There's no shame in protecting family. There's no running from men like Brackett, Elias said. They'd follow or send others. Running just delays the fight and gives them time to prepare better. Then we fight, Clara said firmly. Here on our ground, on our terms. Clara, there could be 50 of them, maybe more. Then we'd better start preparing. What followed was a transformation of the mountain homestead into a fortress. The townspeople who'd come to help brought supplies and ammunition. Defensive positions were established, fields of fire calculated, escape routes planned. Mrs. Thompson arrived with a wagon full of medical supplies, grimly preparing for casualties. That night, as they worked by lamplight to fortify their position, Hope asked the question everyone was thinking. Are we going to die, Mama? Clara pulled her daughter close. We're going to fight for our home sweetheart. Sometimes that's all anyone can do. I can shoot, Hope offered. Papa taught me. I'm good for my age. I know you are, Elias said, kneeling beside his daughter. But your job is to protect Thomas and baby Mary. Can you do that? Hope nodded solemnly, understanding the weight being placed on her young shoulders. In their bed that night, with the children sleeping between them for comfort, Clara whispered, We could take the money. Start over somewhere else. It's not running if it saves them. Is that what you want? I want our children to grow up. I want to see Hope become the fierce woman she's meant to be. I want Thomas to keep his gentle heart. Her voice broke slightly. I want us to grow old together, watching grandchildren play in these mountains. That's what I want too. But Clara, if we run now, we teach them that evil wins if it just pushes hard enough. That everything we've built, everything we've fought for, can be taken away by men with money and threats. And if we stay and fight, then we teach them that some things are worth dying for. That home family justice, these aren't just words but principles worth defending. Even if it costs us everything. Especially then. Dawn came gray and misty, the mountains shrouded in clouds that made visibility difficult. Perfect weather for an ambush, Elias thought grimly. He positioned his defenders carefully. Watson and the best shooters in elevated positions. James leading a mobile force that could respond to breaches, Sarah and Mrs. Thompson preparing the medical station in the root cellar. Clara stood beside him on the porch, both of them armed and ready. Inside, Hope watched over Thomas and baby Mary, her father's old pistol loaded but hopefully unnecessary. They came at full daylight, not 20 men but 40 spreading out to surround the homestead. Brackett rode at their head, supremely confident. Last chance, Boone, he called out. Take the money and live. Go to hell, Brackett. The colonel sighed theatrically. Very well. You've chosen... His words were cut off by a shot that took his hat clean off his head. Hope stood in the doorway, her father's pistol smoking. That was a warning, the 7-year-old shouted. Next one won't miss. For a moment, everyone stood frozen. Then Brackett laughed, cold and harsh. Kill them all, he ordered. Even the children. Leave no witnesses. The battle erupted with shocking violence. Gunfire shattered the morning peace bullets, splintering wood and singing off rocks. The defenders' superior positions initially held dropping several attackers, but Brackett's men were professionals. They advanced using cover coordinating their assault. They're trying to flank us, James shouted, leading his squad to counter a move through the eastern approach. Elias and Clara fought side by side, picking targets with the careful precision of those who couldn't afford to waste ammunition. Watson's men held the high ground, but they were taking casualties, 2 men down already, others wounded but still fighting. Then disaster struck. A group of Brackett's men had circled wide, approaching from an unexpected angle. They burst through the defensive line, heading straight for the cabin. The children! Clara screamed, turning to run, but there were too many enemies between her and the door. That's when they heard it singing. Sarah's clear voice rose above the gunfire, singing an old hymn. But she wasn't in the medical station. She was walking straight toward the attacker's baby Mary in her arms, completely unarmed. Sarah, no, James shouted, but she kept walking, kept singing. The attackers hesitated, confused by this insane display. Who walked into gunfire carrying an infant? You want to kill children, Sarah asked, her voice carrying across the battlefield. Then start with mine. Look her in the eyes and pull the trigger. She held Mary out toward the nearest gunman, the baby gurgling happily, unaware of the danger. Shoot her, Sarah challenged. Show everyone what you really are, not businessmen. Not soldiers, just child killers. The man's gun wavered. Behind him, others shifted uncomfortably. They'd signed on to remove a troublesome lawman, not murder infants. Stand aside, woman, one said roughly. No. You want to get to those children, you go through mine first. Let everyone see. This is ridiculous, Brackett roared. They're obstacles to progress. Remove them. But his men didn't move. The spell Sarah had cast with her desperate gambit held them frozen. That's when the mountains themselves seemed to intervene. A crack like thunder split the air, but it wasn't gunfire. High above the spring snow weakened by the warm weather, and vibrations from the battle began to slide. Avalanche! Someone screamed. The wall of white death swept down the mountainside with terrifying speed. Not toward the cabin the Boones had built wisely in a protected hollow, but directly into the path Brackett's reinforcements were using. Men scattered, horses screamed, chaos erupted. The main force of the avalanche missed everyone, but the threat had shattered the attack's momentum. In the confusion, Elias acted. He didn't shoot Brackett. That would have been too simple, too clean. Instead, he strode through the melee like an avenging angel, grabbed the colonel by his expensive coat, and dragged him to the center of the yard. You want to talk about justice? Elias roared loud enough for everyone to hear. Then let's have it. Trial by combat. Brackett. You and me, winner takes all. That's barbaric, Brackett protested. More barbaric than threatening children. More barbaric than burning families out of their homes. You came here with force, so let's settle this with force. This is illegal. I demand. You demand nothing, Sheriff Watson interrupted. You brought a private army into my jurisdiction. You threatened citizens, including children. You want legal? I'll give you legal except Deputy Boone's challenge, or I'll arrest you right now for conspiracy to commit murder. Brackett looked around at his men, saw their uncertainty. The avalanche had rattled them. Sarah's display had shamed them, and now this, their employer being called out like some common brawler. Fine, Brackett snarled, removing his coat. When I kill you, Boone, your family leaves. Agreed? When I kill you, Elias countered, your men leave and never return. The railroad finds another route. The mines follow existing regulations. The timber companies respect boundaries. Agreed? Agreed. They faced each other in the yard, surrounded by a circle of watching men from both sides. Clara wanted to protest, but she knew this was necessary. Not just for them, but for everyone watching. This was mountain justice at its most primal. Two men, one conflict, final resolution. Brackett was good trained in military combat, younger than his white hair suggested. He came at Elias with scientific precision, using techniques learned at Eastern military academies. But Elias had been forged in a different fire. 10 years of solitary survival, years more of protecting others, had made him something beyond training. He fought like the mountains themselves, implacable, unpredictable, utterly ruthless when necessary. The fight was brutal but brief. Brackett made the mistake of trying to grapple, perhaps thinking his training gave him an advantage close in. Elias, who'd wrestled bears and survived, broke the man's arm with a sound that made even hardened gunmen wince. Brackett fell to his knees, cradling his shattered arm. Elias stood over him, breathing hard. "Yield," Elias commanded. I yield. Louder, so everyone hears. "I yield," Brackett screamed. "God damn you, I yield. Now get out, all of you, and spread the word the Boone family is under protection. Not just my protection, but the protection of every person in these mountains. Come for us again and we won't stop at broken arms." As Brackett's men collected their leader and began their retreat, one lingered, a young man barely out of his teens. "My little sister," he said quietly to Sarah. "She was one of the women Harland forced into marriage. She died 2 years ago. Thank you for showing us what we almost became." He left before anyone could respond, following his defeated comrades down the mountain. The aftermath was its own kind of battle, treating the wounded, reinforcing damaged defenses, counting the cost. They'd lost 2 good men with 5 more wounded, but they'd held. They'd won. That night, as the community gathered to mourn the dead and celebrate survival, old Mrs. Thompson pulled Clara aside. "I have something to tell you," she said quietly, "about that night with Harland." "I don't need to know," Clara said quickly. "Yes, you do. Because it wasn't just me. There were 5 of us women who'd lost daughters, sisters, wives to men like him. We took turns watching the jail, waiting for our chance. I just happened to be the one on watch when the opportunity came. 5 of you. Sometimes justice requires conspiracy. Sometimes protection means working in shadows. Your husband understands that. So does your brother. Now you need to understand it too." Clara looked at this elderly woman who'd helped deliver her children, who'd shown her nothing but grandmotherly kindness, and saw the steel beneath. "Who else?" "That's not for me to say. But know this, you're never as alone as you think. The mountains protect their own, and you're ours now. All of you." As spring turned to summer, life slowly returned to normal. The railroad found a different route, one that didn't require displacing mountain families. The mining companies, suddenly under federal scrutiny thanks to documents Watson had sent to Washington, began following safety regulations. Brackett disappeared. Some said to Mexico, others said to an unmarked grave. No one particularly cared which. Hope grew fiercer, but also wiser, understanding that strength without restraint was just another form of weakness. Thomas remained gentle, but developed his father's watchful eyes, always aware of his surroundings, always protective of those smaller than himself. James and Sarah had another child, a son they named Elias, acknowledging the debt they owed. Their cabin expanded, becoming a school where Sarah taught mountain children to read and write and think for themselves. One autumn evening, as the aspens turned gold and the air carried the promise of snow, Elias found Clara standing on their porch watching their children play in the yard. Hope was teaching Thomas to shoot patient with his smaller hands, while baby Mary, toddling, now chased chickens with delighted shrieks. "Any regrets?" he asked, their old ritual. "One, Clara said, surprising him. "What? That we can't bottle this moment, keep it forever. They're growing so fast, Elias. Hope's almost a woman. Thomas is losing his baby teeth. Soon they'll be facing their own choices, their own battles. That's not a regret. That's life. I suppose, but I wish we could protect them from all of it. The violence, the hard choices, the weight of doing what's necessary even when it costs everything. We can't protect them from life, Clara. We can only prepare them for it. And have we prepared them?" Elias watched his children. Hope's careful instruction, Thomas's focused attention, Mary's fearless exploration. "Look at them. Really look. Hope has your courage and my caution. Thomas has your compassion and my determination. Mary, well, she's still writing her story, but I'd bet it'll be something fierce. They've seen so much violence already. They've seen violence in service of justice. They've seen that sometimes good people have to do hard things, but they've also seen Mercy, Sarah, walking into gunfire to save them. Mrs. Thompson healing enemies alongside friends. They've seen that strength isn't about hurting others, but about protecting what matters. A rider appeared on the trail, moving fast. Elias tensed but relaxed when he recognized the horse. It was Timothy, the former clerk who'd helped expose Harlan's crimes, now a successful lawyer in Denver. Mr. Boone? Mrs. Boone, he called out, dismounting hastily. I have news. They gathered in the yard, children included in this family. Everyone heard the truth together. The president, Timothy gasped, still catching his breath. President Roosevelt himself, he's coming here. What? Clara gasped. He's heard about everything Harlan, the forced marriages, the corruption, the stand against Brackett. He wants to meet the family that stood against it all. And more, he's considering making these mountains a national preserve, protecting them from development permanently. When Elias asked, his mind already racing through preparations, 2 weeks. He'll stop here as part of his Western tour. Sheriff Watson is beside himself with planning. The whole town wants to be involved. After Timothy left to spread the news, the Boone family stood in stunned silence, the President of the United States coming to their mountain cabin. Should we clean? Thomas asked, practically making everyone laugh. We should be ourselves, Clara said firmly. That's what he's coming to see, not a show, but the reality of who we are. 2 weeks later, Theodore Roosevelt stood in their yard, his legendary energy filling the space. He wasn't what they'd expected, shorter than Elias, but with a presence that made him seem larger. His eyes took in everything missing, nothing. So you're the mountain man who became a lawman, he said, shaking Elias's hand with a grip that could crack walnuts. And you're the woman who stood up to corruption in a wedding dress, he added, bowing to Clara with unexpected gallantry. We just did what needed doing, Elias said uncomfortably. Bully? That's exactly what this country needs, people who do what needs doing without waiting for permission or acclaim, Roosevelt boomed. He knelt to Hope's level. And you must be the young lady who shot Brackett's hat off his head. Yes, sir, Mr. President. Papa taught me to always fire a warning shot first. Capital, speak softly and carry a big stick, or in your case, a good pistol. He laughed at his own joke, the sound echoing off the mountains. They spent the day showing Roosevelt the land they'd fought to protect. He listened to their stories, asked penetrating questions, played with the children with genuine delight. As the sun set, he stood with Elias and Clara on the porch. I'm going to make this area a protected preserve, he announced. These mountains, these families, this way of life, it's what America should be. Not the corruption and greed Brackett represented, but this honest people living honest lives protecting what matters. We're honored, Mr. President, Clara said. No, Mrs. Boone. We're honored. You've shown that ordinary citizens can stand against extraordinary evil and win. That's the American spirit at its finest. Before he left, Roosevelt pulled Elias aside. I'm forming a new group of federal lawmen, men who can't be bought, can't be intimidated, who understand that sometimes justice requires flexibility. Interested. I have a family, a home here. Keep them. This would be occasional work, special situations. But I need men like you, Boone. Men who understand that the law is meant to protect people, not prey on them. Elias looked at his family. Clara talking animatedly with Roosevelt's aide's Hope, showing off her marksmanship to impressed soldiers. Thomas carefully examining the president's horse with James's guidance. I'll think about it, he said. Roosevelt clapped him on the shoulder. That's all I ask. Think about it. After the presidential party left, the mountains seemed quieter somehow, as if even they were processing what had just happened. The Boone family gathered in their cabin, the children exhausted from the excitement. Federal lawmen, Clara said thoughtfully. That's a long way from mountain hermit. Too long. No, just full circle in a way. You wanted to be a lawman, had it taken away, and now it's being offered again. It would mean danger, travel, time away from home. It would mean protecting other families like strangers protected ours. It would mean Hope and Thomas growing up knowing their father helped shape the law, not just enforce it. You think I should accept? I think you already know what you're going to do. She was right, of course. Elias had known from the moment Roosevelt made the offer. The mountains had given him sanctuary when he needed it. Clara had given him love when he'd forgotten what it meant. Their children had given him purpose beyond survival. Now he had a chance to pay that forward to ensure other families had the same opportunities. Together, he asked, though it wasn't really a question. Always together, Clara confirmed, even when we're apart. But that winter, as snow blanketed the mountains in pristine white, a letter arrived with a federal marshal's star. Elias Boone, who'd fled civilization as a killer, was now officially part of reshaping it. His first assignment came in spring, investigating corruption in mining camps 3 states away. He was gone for 3 weeks, returning with a slight limp and a new scar, but also with 5 men arrested and a mining operation shut down for using child labor. "Did you kill anyone?" Hope asked bluntly. She was 8 now, old enough to understand the weight of such questions. "No, I found another way." "Good," she said firmly. "Killing should always be the last choice." "Who taught you that?" "You did, Papa. Every day and how you choose to live." The years passed in this rhythm, Elias, taking federal assignments, always returning to his mountain home, always finding Clara waiting with unwavering support. Hope grew into a formidable young woman, equally comfortable in a dress or boots, as likely to quote Shakespeare as to track a deer. Thomas became a bridge between worlds, his gentle nature tempering mountain toughness with genuine compassion. Mary James and Sarah's daughter grew wild and free, a second daughter to Elias and Clara in all but blood. More children came. Clara bore another son, William, when Hope was 10. James and Sarah had 3 more, filling both cabins with laughter and chaos. The mountain settlement grew but never lost its character, protected by Roosevelt's designation and the fierce loyalty of its inhabitants. On Hope's 16th birthday, she announced her intention to become a lawyer. "Not a lawman like Papa," she clarified. "A lawyer. Someone who shapes the law itself, makes sure it protects people like us, not just people like Brackett." "That's a hard path for a woman," Clara warned. "Everything worth doing is hard. You taught me that, Mama." Well, Thomas at 14 surprised everyone by announcing he wanted to be a doctor. "I've seen enough violence," he said quietly. "I want to heal instead of hurt." Elias felt a complex mix of pride and relief. His children would carry on the fight for justice, but in their own ways, with their own weapons. One evening, 20 years after that desperate wedding in Cedar Falls, Elias and Clara stood once again on their porch. Their hair was streaked with gray now, lines etched by weather, and worry and laughter marked their faces. But their eyes held the same fire that had brought them together. "Any regrets?" Elias asked. "None," Clara said, then reconsidered. "Well, one. What's that? I never got to wear a proper wedding dress. That old thing of my grandmother's was beautiful, but borrowed. I never had my own." Elias was quiet for a moment, then disappeared inside. He returned with a box Clara had never seen before. "I've been saving this for the right moment," he said, opening it to reveal a simple but elegant wedding dress mountain. Practical but undeniably beautiful. "Thought maybe for our 20th anniversary." "Elias Boone, are you proposing to me again?" "I'm proposing that we renew what we started in desperation but continued in love. That we stand before our children, our community, our mountains, and declare that every choice we made, we'd make again." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "Yes. Yes, of course, yes." The renewal ceremony was held in the same meadow where James and Sarah had married, where Hope had taken her first steps, where Roosevelt had declared the land protected. The entire mountain community attended. Sheriff Watson, gray-haired but still sharp. Mrs. Thompson, ancient but indomitable. Timothy, now a federal judge. And dozens of families who'd found sanctuary and strength in these peaks. Hope stood as her mother's maid of honor, Thomas as his father's best man. Little William carried rings made from gold Elias had panned himself. Mary scattered wildflowers with enthusiastic abandon. 20 years ago, the minister began, these two stood before me in circumstances none would choose. Today they stand here by choice, surrounded by the life they built from that desperate beginning. Elias and Clara faced each other, hands clasped, seeing not who they'd been, but who they'd become. The mountain man and the desperate bride had transformed into pillars of their community protectors, of the innocent parents of remarkable children. I loved you before I knew you, Elias said, his voice carrying across the meadow. I love the courage you showed in that church. I love you more now, knowing your strength, your compassion, your unwavering faith in us. You gave me choice when I had none, Clara replied. You gave me freedom when I was trapped. You gave me love when I expected only survival. Every day since has been a gift I never expected. When they kissed, the mountains themselves seemed to approve, a warm wind carrying the scent of pine and wildflowers across the gathering. As the sun set on their renewal day, painting the peaks in shades of gold, and rose, the Boone family stood together, Elias and Clara Hope, and Thomas and William, surrounded by chosen family that had become blood family through trials and triumphs. Tell us the story again, William demanded, as young children do, about how you met Mama. Elias and Clara exchanged glances, 20 years of shared memories passing between them. Well, Elias began, settling into his storyteller voice, I hadn't seen a woman in 10 years when I walked into that church. The story would be told and retold, passed down through generations, each telling adding layers while keeping the essential truth that sometimes love comes from the most unexpected places, that family is built on choice as much as blood, and that standing for justice, no matter the cost, is the only way to ensure freedom for those who come after.